Simon & Schuster Audio presents The Gunslinger, The Dark Tower, Book 1 by Stephen King. Read by George Guidall.
Chapter 1. The Gunslinger. 1. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. The desert was the apotheosis of all deserts, huge, standing to the sky for what looked like eternity in all directions. It was white and blinding and waterless, and without feature save for the faint, cloudy haze of the mountains which sketched themselves on the horizon, and the devil grass, which brought sweet dreams, nightmares, death. An occasional tombstone sign pointed the way. For once, the drifted track that cut its way through the thick crust of alkali had been a highway. Coaches and buckas had followed it. The world had moved on since then. The world had emptied. The gunslinger had been struck by a momentary dizziness, a kind of yawing sensation that made the entire world seem ephemeral, almost a thing that could be looked through. It passed, and, like the world upon whose hide he walked, he moved on. He passed the miles stolidly, not hurrying, not loafing. A hide water bag was slung around his middle like a bloated sausage. It was almost full. He had progressed through the Kef over many years and had reached perhaps the 5th level. Had he been a manny holy man, he might not have even been thirsty. He could have watched his own body dehydrate with clinical, detached attention, watering its crevices and dark inner hollows only when his logic told him it must be done. He was not a manny, however, nor a follower of the man Jesus, and considered himself in no way holy. He was just an ordinary pilgrim, in other words, and all he could say with real certainty was that he was thirsty. And even so, he had no particular urge to drink. In a vague way, all this pleased him. It was what the country required. It was a thirsty country. And he had, in his long life, been nothing if not adaptable. Below the water bag were his guns, carefully weighted to his hands. A plate had been added to each when they had come to him from his father, who had been lighter and not so tall. The 2 belts crisscrossed above his crotch. The holsters were oiled too deeply for even this Philistine's son to crack. The stocks of the guns were sandalwood, yellow and finely grained. Rawhide tie-downs held the holsters loosely to his thighs, and they swung a bit with his step. They had rubbed away the bluing of his jeans and thinned the cloth in a pair of arcs that looked almost like smiles. The brass casings of the cartridges looped into the gun belts, heliographed in the sun. There were fewer now. The leather made subtle creaking noises. His shirt, the no color of rain or dust, was open at the throat, with a rawhide thong dangling loosely in hand-punched eyelets. His hat was gone, so was the horn he had once carried. Gone for years, that horn, spilled from the hand of a dying friend, and he missed them both. He breasted a gently rising dune, although there was no sand here. The desert was hardpan, and even the harsh winds that blew when dark came raised only an aggravating, harsh dust like scouring powder, and saw the kicked remains of a tiny campfire on the lee side, the side the sun would quit earliest. Small signs like this, once more affirming the man in black's possible humanity, never failed to please him. His lips stretched in the pitted, flaked remains of his face. The grin was gruesome, painful. He squatted. His quarry had burned the devil grass, of course. It was the only thing out here that would burn. It burned with a greasy, flat light, and it burned slow. Border dwellers had told him that devils lived even in the flames. They burned it but would not look into the light. They said the devils hypnotized, beckoned, would eventually draw the one who looked into the fires. And the next man foolish enough to look into the fire might see you. The burned grass was crisscrossed in the now familiar ideographic pattern and crumbled to gray senselessness before the gunslinger's prodding hand. There was nothing in the remains but a charred scrap of bacon, which he ate thoughtfully. It had always been this way. The gunslinger had followed the man in black across the desert for 2 months now, across the endless, screamingly monotonous purgatorial wastes, and had yet to find spoor other than the hygienic, sterile ideographs of the man in black's campfires. He had not found a can, a bottle, or a water bag. The gunslinger had left 4 of those behind, like dead snakeskins. He hadn't found any dung. He assumed the man in black buried it. Perhaps the campfires were a message, spelled out one great letter at a time. "Keep your distance, partner," it might say. Or, "The end draweth nigh." Or maybe even, "Come and get me." It didn't matter what they said or didn't say. He had no interest in messages, if messages they were. What mattered was that these remains were as cold as all the others. Yet he had gained. He knew he was closer, but didn't know how he knew. A kind of smell, perhaps. That didn't matter either. He would keep going until something changed. And if nothing changed, he would keep going anyway. There would be water if God willed it, the old-timers said. Water if God willed it, even in the desert. The gunslinger stood up, brushing his hands. No other trace. The wind, razor-sharp, had of course filed away even what scant tracks the hardpan might once have held. No man scat, no cast-off trash, never a sign of where those things might have been buried. Nothing. Only these cold campfires along the ancient highway moving southeast and the relentless range-finder in his own head. Although, of course, it was more than that. The pull southeast was more than just a sense of direction. Was even more than magnetism. He sat down and allowed himself a short pull from the water bag. He thought of that momentary dizziness earlier in the day, that sense of being almost untethered from the world, and wondered what it might have meant. Why should that dizziness make him think of his horn and the last of his old friends, both lost so long ago at Jericho Hill? He still had the guns, his father's guns, and surely they were more important than horns, or even friends. Weren't they? The question was oddly troubling, but since there seemed to be no answer but the obvious one, he put it aside, possibly for later consideration. He scanned the desert and then looked up at the sun, which was now sliding into a far quadrant of the sky that was, disturbingly, not quite true west. He got up, removed his threadbare gloves from his belt, and began to pull devil grass for his own fire, which he laid over the ashes the man in black had left. He found the irony, like his thirst, bitterly appealing. He did not take the flint and steel from his purse until the remains of the day were only fugitive heat in the ground beneath him and a sardonic orange line on the monochrome horizon. He sat with his gunna drawn across his lap and watched the southeast patiently, looking toward the mountains, not hoping to see the thin, straight line of smoke from a new campfire, not expecting to see an orange spark of flame, but watching anyway, because watching was a part of it, and had its own bitter satisfaction. "You will not see what you do not look for, maggot," Court would have said. "Open the gobs the gods gave you, will you not?" But there was nothing. He was close, but only relatively so, not close enough to see smoke at dusk or the orange wink of a campfire. He laid the flint down the steel rod and struck his spark to the dry, shredded grass, muttering the old and powerful nonsense words as he did. "Spark-a-dark, where's my sire? Will I lay me? Will I stay me? Bless this camp with fire." It was strange, how some of childhood's words and ways fell at the wayside and were left behind, while others clamped tight and rode for life, growing the heavier to carry as time passed. He lay down upwind of his little blazon, letting the dream smoke blow out toward the waist. The wind, except for occasional gyrating dust devils, was constant. Above, the stars were unwinking, also constant. Suns and worlds by the million. Dizzying constellations, cold fire in every primary hue. As he watched, the sky washed from violet to ebony. A meteor etched a brief, spectacular arc below Old Mother and winked out. The fire threw strange shadows as the devil grass burned its slow way down into new patterns, not ideograms, but a straightforward crisscross, vaguely frightening in its own no-nonsense surety. He had laid his fuel in a pattern that was not artful, but only workable. It spoke of blacks and whites. It spoke of a man who might straighten bad pictures in strange hotel rooms. The fire burned its steady, slow flame, and phantoms danced in its incandescent core. The gunslinger did not see. The two patterns, art and craft, were welded together as he slept. The wind moaned, a witch with cancer in her belly. Every now and then a perverse downdraft would make the smoke whirl and puff toward him, and he breathed some of it in. It built dreams in the same way that a small irritant may build a pearl in an oyster. The gunslinger occasionally moaned with the wind. The stars were as indifferent to this as they were to wars, crucifixions, resurrections. This also would have pleased him. 2. He had come down off the last of the foothills, leading the mule, whose eyes were already dead and bulging with the heat. He had passed the last town 3 weeks before, and since then there had only been the deserted coach track and an occasional huddle of border dwellers' sod dwellings. The huddles had degenerated into single dwellings, most inhabited by lepers or madmen. He found the madmen better company. One had given him a stainless steel silver compass and bade him give it to the man Jesus. The gunslinger took it gravely. If he saw him, he would turn over the compass. He did not expect that he would, but anything was possible. Once he saw a taheen, this one a man with a raven's head, but the misbegotten thing fled at his hail, cawing what might have been words, what might even have been curses. 5 days had passed since the last hut, and he had begun to suspect there would be no more when he topped the last eroded hill and saw the familiar low-backed sod roof. The dweller, a surprisingly young man with a wild shock of strawberry hair that reached almost to his waist, was weeding a scrawny stand of corn with zealous abandon. The mule let out a wheezing grunt, and the dweller looked up, glaring blue eyes coming target center on the gunslinger in a moment. The dweller was unarmed, with no bolt nor bar the gunslinger could see. He raised both hands in curt salute to the stranger, and then bent to the corn again, humping up the row next to his hut with back bent, tossing devil grass and an occasional stunted corn plant over his shoulder. His hair flopped and flew in the wind that now came directly from the desert, with nothing to break it. The gunslinger came down the hill slowly, leading the mule on which his waterskins sloshed. He paused by the edge of the lifeless-looking corn patch, drew a drink from one of his skins to start the saliva, and spat into the arid soil. "Life for your crop. Life for your own," the dweller answered, and stood up. His back popped audibly. He surveyed the gunslinger without fear. The little of his face, visible between beard and hair, seemed unmarked by the rot, and his eyes, while a bit wild, seemed sane. "Long days and pleasant nights, stranger." "And may you have twice the number." "Unlikely," the dweller replied, and voiced a curt laugh. "I don't have no but corn and beans," he said. Corn's free, but you'll have to kick something in for the beans. A man brings 'em out once in a while. He don't stay long." The dweller laughed shortly. "Afraid of spirits? Afraid of the Birdman, too." "I saw him. The Birdman, I mean. He fled me." "Yar, he's lost his way. Claims to be looking for a place called Algol Ciento. Only sometimes he calls it Blue Haven or Heaven. I can't make out which." The gunslinger shook his head. "Well, he don't bite, and he don't bide, so fuck him. Is thee alive or dead?" "Alive," the gunslinger said. "You speak as the Mani do." "I was with him a while, but that was no life for me. Too chummy, they are, and always looking for holes in the world." This was true. The gunslinger reflected. The Mani folk were great travelers. The two of them looked at each other in silence for a moment, and then the dweller put out his hand. "Brown is my name." The gunslinger shook and gave his own name. As he did so, a scrawny raven croaked from the low peak of the sod roof. The dweller gestured at it briefly. "That's Zoltan." At the sound of its name, the raven croaked again and flew across to Brown. It landed on the dweller's head and roosted, talons firmly twined in the wild thatch of hair. "Screw you!" Zoltan croaked brightly. "Screw you and the horse you rode in on." The gunslinger nodded amiably. "Beans, beans, a musical fruit," the raven recited, inspired. "The more you eat, the more you toot." "You teach him that?" "That's all he wants to learn, I guess," Brown said. "Tried to teach him the Lord's Prayer once." His eyes traveled out beyond the hut for a moment, toward the gritty, featureless hardpan. "Guess this ain't Lord's Prayer country. You're a gunslinger, that right?" "Yes." He hunkered down and brought out his makings. Zoltan launched himself from Brown's head and landed flittering on the gunslinger's shoulder. "Thought your kind was gone." "Then you see different, don't you?" "Did he come from in-world?" "Long ago," the gunslinger agreed. "Anything left there?" To this the gunslinger made no reply, but his face suggested this was a topic better not pursued. "After the other one, I guess." "Yes." The inevitable question followed, how long since he passed by? Brown shrugged. "I don't know. Time's funny out here. Distance and direction, too. More than 2 weeks. Less than 2 months. The Bean Man's been twice since he passed. I'd guess 6 weeks. That's probably wrong." "The more you eat, the more you toot," Zoltan said. "Did he lay by?" the gunslinger asked. Brown nodded. "He stayed supper, same as you will, I guess. We passed the time." The gunslinger stood up, and the bird flew back to the roof, squawking. He felt an odd, trembling eagerness. What did he talk about? Brown cocked an eyebrow at him. "Not much. Did it ever rain, and when did I come here, and had I buried my wife?" He asked was she of the Mani folk, and I said yar, because it seemed like he already knew. I did most of the talking, which ain't usual. He paused, and the only sound was the stark wind. "He's a sorcerer, ain't he?" "Among other things." Brown nodded slowly. "I knew. He dropped a rabbit out of his sleeve, all gutted and ready for the pot." "Are you?" "A sorcerer?" he laughed. "I'm just a man." "You'll never catch him." "I'll catch him." They looked at each other. A sudden depth of feeling between them, the dweller upon his dust-puffed dry ground, the gunslinger on the hard pan that shelved down to the desert. He reached for his flint. "Here." Brown produced a sulphur-headed match and struck it with a grimed nail. The gunslinger pushed the tip of his smoke into the flame and drew. "Thanks." "You'll want to fill your skins," the dweller said, turning away. "Spring's under the eaves and back. I'll start dinner." The gunslinger stepped gingerly over the rows of corn and went around back. The spring was at the bottom of a hand-dug well, lined with stones to keep the powdery earth from caving. As he descended the rickety ladder, the gunslinger reflected that the stones must represent 2 years' work easily. Hauling, dragging, laying. The water was clear but slow-moving, and filling the skins was a long chore. While he was topping the second, Zoltan perched on the lip of the well. "Screw you and the horse you rode in on," he advised. The gunslinger looked up, startled. The shaft was about 15 feet deep. Easy enough for Brown to drop a rock on him, break his head, and steal everything on him. A crazy or a rotter wouldn't do it. Brown was neither. Yet he liked Brown. And so he pushed the thought out of his mind and got the rest of the water God had willed. Whatever else God willed was Kaa's business, not his. When he came through the hut's door and walked down the steps, the hovel proper was set below ground level, designed to catch and hold the coolness of the nights. Brown was poking ears of corn into the embers of a tiny fire with a crude hardwood spatula. 2 ragged plates had been set at opposite ends of a dun blanket. Water for the beans was just beginning to bubble in a pot hung over the fire. "I'll pay for the water, too." Brown did not look up. "The water's a gift from God, as I think thee knows. Papa Doc brings the beans." The gunslinger grunted a laugh and sat down with his back against one rude wall, folded his arms, and closed his eyes. After a little, the smell of roasting corn came to his nose. There was a pebbly rattle as Brown dumped a paper of dry beans into the pot. An occasional tuck-tuck-tuck as Zoltan walked restlessly on the roof. He was tired. He had been going 16 and sometimes 18 hours a day between here and the horror that had occurred in Tull, the last village. And he had been afoot for the last 12 days. The mule was at the end of its endurance, only living because it was a habit. Once he had known a boy named Shimi, who'd had a mule. Shimi was gone now. They were all gone now. And there was only the 2 of them, him and the man in black. He had heard rumor of other lands beyond this, green lands in a place called Midworld. But it was hard to believe. Out here, green lands seemed like a child's fantasy. Tuck, tuck, tuck. 2 weeks, Brown had said, or as many as 6. Didn't matter. There had been calendars in Tull, and they had remembered the man in black because of the old man he had healed on his way through. Just an old man dying of the weed, an old man of 35. And if Brown was right, he had closed a good deal of distance on the man in black since then. But the desert was next, and the desert would be hell. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Lend me your wings, bird. I'll spread them and fly on the thermals. He slept. 3. Brown woke him up an hour later. It was dark. The only light was the dull cherry glare of the banked embers. "Your mule is passed on," Brown said. "Tell you sorry. Dinner's ready." "How?" Brown shrugged. "Roasted and boiled. How else? You picky?" "No, the mule." "It just laid over, that's all. It looked like an old mule." And with a touch of apology, "Zoltan ate the eyes." "Oh." He might have expected it. "All right." Brown surprised him again when they sat down to the blanket that served as a table by asking a brief blessing. Rain, health, expansion to the spirit. "Do you believe in an afterlife?" the gunslinger asked him as Brown dropped 3 ears of hot corn onto his plate. Brown nodded. "I think this is it." 4. The beans were like bullets, the corn tough. Outside, the prevailing wind snuffled and whined around the ground-level eaves. The gunslinger ate quickly, ravenously, drinking 4 cups of water with the meal. Halfway through, there was a machine gun rapping at the door. Brown got up and let Zoltan in. The bird flew across the room and hunched moodily in the corner. "Musical fruit," he muttered. "You ever think about eating him?" the gunslinger asked. The dweller laughed. "Animals that talk be tough," he said. "Birds, billy bumblers, human beings, they be tough eatin'." After dinner, the gunslinger offered his tobacco. The dweller, Brown, accepted eagerly. "Now," the gunslinger thought, "now the questions will come." But Brown asked no questions. He smoked tobacco that had been grown in Garland years before and looked at the dying embers of the fire. It was already noticeably cooler in the hovel. "Lead us not into temptation," Zoltan said suddenly, apocalyptically. The gunslinger started as if he had been shot at. He was suddenly sure all this was an illusion, that the man in black had spun a spell and was trying to tell him something in a maddeningly obtuse, symbolic way. "Do you know Tull?" he asked suddenly. Brown nodded. "Came through it to get here. Went back once to sell corn and drink a glass of whiskey. It rained that year, lasted maybe 15 minutes. The ground just seemed to open and suck it up. An hour later it was just as white and dry as ever, but the corn, God, the corn, you could see it grow. That wasn't so bad, but you could hear it, as if the rain had given it a mouth. It wasn't a happy sound. It seemed to be sighing and groaning its way out of the earth." He paused. "I had extra, so I took it and sold it. Papa Doc said he'd do it, but he would have cheated me, so I went." "You don't like town?" "No." "I almost got killed there," the gunslinger said. "Do you say so?" "Set my watch and warrant on it. And I killed a man that was touched by God," the gunslinger said. "Only it wasn't God. It was the man with the rabbit up his sleeve, the man in black." "He laid you a trap." "You say true, I say thank you." They looked at each other across the shadows, the moment taking on overtones of finality. Now, the questions will come. But Brown still had no questions to ask. His cigarette was down to a smoldering roach, but when the gunslinger tapped his poke, Brown shook his head. Zoltan shifted restlessly, seemed about to speak, subsided. "Will I tell you about it?" the gunslinger asked. "Ordinarily I'm not much of a talker, but sometimes talking helps. I'll listen." The gunslinger searched for words to begin and found none. "I have to pass water," he said. Brown nodded. "Pass it in the corn, please." "Sure." He went up the stairs and out into the dark. The stars glittered overhead. The wind pulsed. His urine arched out over the powdery cornfield in a wavering stream. The man in black had drawn him here. It wasn't beyond possibility that Brown was the man in black. He might be. The gunslinger shut these useless and upsetting thoughts away. The only contingency he had not learned how to bear was the possibility of his own madness. He went back inside. "Have you decided if I'm an enchantment yet?" Brown asked, amused. The gunslinger paused on the tiny landing, startled. Then he came down slowly and sat. "The thought crossed my mind. Are you?" "If I am, I don't know it." This wasn't a terribly helpful answer, but the gunslinger decided to let it pass. "I started to tell you about Tull." "Is it growing?" "It's dead," the gunslinger said. "I killed it." He thought of adding, "And now I'm going to kill you, if for no other reason than I don't want to have to sleep with one eye open." But had he come to such behavior? If so, why bother to go on at all? Why, if he had become what he pursued? Brown said, "I don't want nothing from you, gunslinger, except to still be here when you move on. I won't beg for my life, but that don't mean I don't want it yet a while longer." The gunslinger closed his eyes. His mind whirled. "Tell me what you are," he said thickly. "Just a man, one who means you no harm. And I'm still willing to listen if you're willing to talk." To this the gunslinger made no reply. "I guess you won't feel right about it unless I invite you," Brown said. "And so I do. Will you tell me about Tull?" The gunslinger was surprised to find that this time the words were there. He began to speak in flat bursts that slowly spread into an even, slightly toneless narrative. He found himself oddly excited. He talked deep into the night. Brown did not interrupt at all. Neither did the bird. 5. He'd bought the mule in Pricetown. and when he reached Tull it was still fresh. The sun had set an hour earlier, but the gunslinger had continued traveling, guided by the town glow in the sky, then by the uncannily clear notes of a honky-tonk piano playing Hey Jude. The road widened as it took on tributaries. Here and there were overhead spark lights, all of them long dead. The forests were long gone now, replaced by the monotonous flat prairie country. Endless, desolate fields gone to timothy and low shrubs. Eerie, deserted estates guarded by brooding, shadowed mansions where demons undeniably walked. Leering, empty shanties where the people had either moved on or had been moved along. An occasional dweller's hovel given away by a single flickering point of light in the dark, or by sullen, inbred clan fams toiling silently in the fields by day. Corn was the main crop, but there were beans and also some pokeberries. An occasional scrawny cow stared at him lumpishly from between peeled alder poles. Coaches had passed him 4 times, twice coming and twice going, nearly empty as they came up on him from behind and bypassed him and his mule, fuller as they headed back toward the forests of the north. Now and then a farmer passed with his feet up on the splashboard of his bucka, careful not to look at the man with the guns. It was ugly country. It had showered twice since he had left Pricetown, grudgingly both times. Even the timothy looked yellow and dispirited. Pass-on-by country. He had seen no sign of the man in black. Perhaps he had taken a coach. The road made a bend, and beyond it the gunslinger clucked the mule to a stop and looked down at Tull. It was at the floor of a circular, bowl-shaped hollow, a shoddy jewel in a cheap setting. There were a number of lights, most of them clustered around the area of the music. There looked to be 4 streets, 3 running at right angles to the coach road, which was the main avenue of the town. Perhaps there would be a cafe. He doubted it, but perhaps. He clucked at the mule. More houses sporadically lined the road now, most of them still deserted. He passed a tiny graveyard with mouldy, leaning wooden slabs overgrown and choked by the rank devil grass. Perhaps 500 feet further on, he passed a chewed sign which said, Tull. The paint was flaked almost to the point of illegibility. There was another further on, but the gunslinger was not able to read that one at all. A fool's chorus of half-stoned voices was rising in the final protracted lyric of Hey Jude. Na, 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 Hey Jude, as he entered the town proper. It was a dead sound, like the wind in the hollow of a rotted tree. Only the prosaic thump and pound of the honky-tonk piano saved him from seriously wondering if the man in black might not have raised ghosts to inhabit a deserted town. He smiled a little at the thought. There were people on the streets, but not many. 3 ladies wearing black slacks and identical high-collared blouses passed by on the opposite boardwalk, not looking at him with pointed curiosity. Their faces seemed to swim above their all-but-invisible bodies like pallid balls with eyes. A solemn old man with a straw hat, perched firmly on top of his head, watched him from the steps of a boarded-up mercantile store. A scrawny tailor with a late customer paused to watch him go by. He held up the lamp in his window for a better look. The gunslinger nodded. Neither the tailor nor his customer nodded back. He could feel their eyes resting heavily upon the low-slung holsters that lay against his hips. A young boy, perhaps 13, and a girl who might have been his sissa or his jilly child crossed the street a block up, pausing imperceptibly. Their footfalls raised little hanging clouds of dust. Here in town most of the street-side lamps worked, but they weren't electric. Their isinglass sides were cloudy with congealed oil. Some had been crashed out. There was a livery with a just hanging-on look to it, probably depending on the coach line for its survival. 3 boys were crouched silently around a marble ring drawn in the dust to one side of the barn's gaping maw, smoking corn-shuck cigarettes. They made long shadows in the yard. One had a scorpion's tail poked in the band of his hat, another had a bloated left eye bulging sightlessly from its socket. The gunslinger led his mule past them and looked into the dim depths of the barn. One lamp glowed sunkenly. A shadow jumped and flickered as a gangling old man in bib overalls forked loose timothy hay into the hayloft with big, grunting swipes of his fork. "Hey!" the gunslinger called. The fork faltered, and the hostler looked around with yellow-tinged eyes. "Hey yourself! I got a mule here. Good for you!" The gunslinger flicked a heavy, unevenly milled gold piece into the semi-dark. It rang on the old, chaff-drifted boards and glittered. The hostler came forward, bent, picked it up, squinted at the gunslinger. His eyes dropped to the gun belts, and he nodded sourly. "How long you want him put up?" "A night or two, maybe longer." "I ain't got no change for gold." "Didn't ask for any." "Shoot up money," the hostler muttered. "What did you say?" "Nothing." The hostler caught the mule's bridle and led him inside. "Rub him down," the gunslinger called. "I expect to smell it on him when I come back. Hear me well." The old man did not turn. The gunslinger walked out to the boys crouched around the marble ring. They had watched the entire exchange with contemptuous interest. "Long days and pleasant nights," the gunslinger offered conversationally. No answer. "You fellas live in town?" No answer, unless the scorpion's tail gave one. It seemed to nod. One of the boys removed a crazily tilted twist of cornshuck from his mouth, grasped a green cat's-eye marble, and squirted it into the dirt circle. It struck a croaker and knocked it outside. He picked up the cat's eye and prepared to shoot again. "There a cafe in this town?" the gunslinger asked. One of them looked up, the youngest. There was a huge cold sore at the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were both the same size and full of an innocence that wouldn't last long in this shithole. He looked at the gunslinger with hooded, brimming wonder that was touching and frightening. "Might get a burger at Sheb's." "That the honky-tonk?" The boy nodded. "Yar." The eyes of his mates had turned ugly and hostile. He would probably pay for having spoken up in kindness. The gunslinger touched the brim of his hat. "I'm grateful. It's good to know someone in this town is bright enough to talk." He walked past, mounted the boardwalk, and started down toward Sheb's, hearing the clear, contemptuous voice of one of the others, hardly more than a childish treble. "Weed-eater! How long you been screwing your sister, Charlie? Weed-eater!" Then the sound of a blow and a cry. There were 3 flaring kerosene lamps in front of Sheb's, one to each side and one nailed above the drunk-hung bat-wing doors. The chorus of Hey Jude had petered out, and the piano was plinking some other old ballad. Voices murmured like broken threads. The gunslinger paused outside for a moment, looking in. Sawdust floor, spittoons by the tipsy-legged tables, a plank bar on sawhorses, a gummy mirror behind it reflecting the piano player, who wore an inevitable piano-stool slouch. The front of the piano had been removed so you could watch the wooden keys wonk up and down as the contraption was played. The bartender was a straw-haired woman wearing a dirty blue dress. One strap was held with a safety pin. There were perhaps 6 townies in the back of the room, juicing and playing Watch Me apathetically. Another half-dozen were grouped loosely about the piano. 4 or 5 at the bar, and an old man with wild gray hair collapsed at a table by the doors. The gunslinger went in. Heads swiveled to look at him and his guns. There was a moment of near silence, except for the oblivious piano player, who continued to tinkle. Then the woman mopped at the bar, and things shifted back. "Watch me," one of the players in the corner said, and matched 3 hearts with 4 spades, emptying his hand. The one with the hearts swore, pushed over his stake, and the next hand was dealt. The gunslinger approached the woman at the bar. "You got meat?" he asked. "Sure." She looked him in the eye, and she might have been pretty when she started out, but the world had moved on since then. Now her face was lumpy, and there a livid scar went corkscrewing across her forehead. She had powdered it heavily, and the powder called attention to what it had been meant to camouflage. "Clean beef, threaded stock. It's dear, though." Threaded stock, my ass, the gunslinger thought. What you got in your cooler came from something with 3 eyes, 6 legs, or both. That's my guess, Lady Sigh. I want 3 burgers and a beer, would it please you? Again that subtle shift in tone. 3 hamburgers, mouths watered and tongues licked at saliva with slow lust. 3 hamburgers. Had anyone here ever seen anyone eat 3 hamburgers at a go?
That would go you $5. Do you ken box?
Dollars? She nodded, so she was probably saying bucks. That was his guess, anyway. That with the beer? He asked, smiling a little. Or is the beer extra? She didn't return the smile.
I'll throw in the suds, once I see the color of your money, that is.
The gunslinger put a gold piece on the bar, and every eye followed it. There was a smoldering charcoal cooker behind the bar and to the left of the mirror. The woman disappeared into a small room behind it and returned with meat on a paper. She scrimped out 3 patties and put them on the grill. The smell that arose was maddening. The gunslinger stood with stolid indifference, only peripherally aware of the faltering piano, the slowing of the card game, the sidelong glances of the barflies. The man was halfway up behind him. When the gunslinger saw him in the mirror, the man was almost completely bald, and his hand was wrapped around the haft of a gigantic hunting knife that was looped onto his belt like a holster. "Go sit down," the gunslinger said. "Do yourself a favor, Cully." The man stopped. His upper lip lifted unconsciously, like a dog's, and there was a moment of silence. Then he went back to his table, and the atmosphere shifted back again. Beer came in a cracked glass schooner.
"I ain't got change for gold,"
the woman said truculently. "Don't expect any." She nodded angrily, as if this show of wealth, even at her benefit, incensed her. But she took his gold, and a moment later the hamburgers came on a cloudy plate, still red around the edges. "Do you have salt?" She gave it to him in a little crock she took from underneath the bar. White lumps he'd have to crumble with his fingers. "Bread?"
"No bread."
He knew she was lying, but he also knew why and didn't push it. The bald man was staring at him with cyanosed eyes, his hands clenching and unclenching on the splintered and gouged surface of his table. His nostrils flared with pulsating regularity, scooping up the smell of the meat. That, at least, was free. The gunslinger began to eat steadily, not seeming to taste, merely chopping the meat apart and forking it into his mouth, trying not to think of what the cow this had come from must have looked like. Threaded stock, she had said. Yes, quite likely. And pigs would dance the Kamala in the light of the peddler's moon. He was almost through, ready to call for another beer and roll a smoke, when the hand fell on his shoulder. He suddenly became aware that the room had once more gone silent, and he tasted tension in the air. He turned around and stared into the face of the man who had been asleep by the door when he entered. It was a terrible face. The odor of the devil grass was a rank miasma. The eyes were damned, the staring, glaring eyes of one who sees but does not see, eyes ever turned inward to the sterile hell of dreams beyond control, dreams unleashed, risen out of the stinking swamps of the unconscious. The woman behind the bar made a small moaning sound. The cracked lips writhed, lifted, revealing the green, mossy teeth, and the gunslinger thought, he's not even smoking it anymore, he's chewing it. He's really chewing it. And on the heels of that, he's a dead man. He should have been dead a year ago. And on the heels of that, the man in black did this. They stared at each other, the gunslinger and the man who had gone around the rim of madness. He spoke, and the gunslinger, dumbfounded, heard himself addressed in the high speech of Gilead.
"The gold for a favor, Gunslinger sigh. Just one? For a pretty."
The high speech. For a moment his mind refused to track it. It had been years, God, centuries, millenniums. There was no more high speech. He was the last gunslinger. The others were all... Numbed, he reached into his breast pocket and produced a gold piece. The split, scabbed, gangrenous hand reached for it, fondled it, held it up to reflect the greasy glare of the kerosene lamps. It threw off its proud, civilized glow, golden, reddish, bloody. Ah! An inarticulate sound of pleasure. The old man did a weaving turn and began moving back to his table, holding the coin at eye level, turning it, flashing it. The room was emptying rapidly, the bat wings shuttling madly back and forth. The piano player closed the lid of his instrument with a bang and exited after the others in long, comic opera strides. "Sheb!" the woman screamed after him, her voice an odd mixture of fear and shrewishness. "Sheb, you come back here! God damn it!" Was that a name the gunslinger had heard before? He thought yes, but there was no time to reflect upon it now or to cast his mind back. The old man, meanwhile, had gone back to his table. He spun the gold piece on the gouged wood, and the dead, alive eyes followed it with empty fascination. He spun it a second time, a third, and his eyelids drooped. The fourth time, and his head settled to the wood before the coin stopped. "There," she said softly, furiously. "You've driven out my trade. Are you satisfied?" "They'll be back," the gunslinger said. "Not tonight, they won't." "Who is he?" He gestured at the weed-eater. "Go fuck yourself, sigh." "I have to know," the gunslinger said patiently. He talked to you funny," she said. "Nort never talked like that in his life." "I'm looking for a man. You would know him." She stared at him, the anger dying. It was replaced with speculation, then with a high, wet gleam he had seen before. The rickety building ticked thoughtfully to itself. A dog barked brayingly far away. The gunslinger waited. She saw his knowledge, and the gleam was replaced by hopelessness, by a dumb need that had no mouth. "I guess maybe you know my price," she said. "I've got an itch I used to be able to take care of, but now I can't." He looked at her steadily. The scar would not show in the dark. Her body was lean enough so the desert and grit and grind hadn't been able to sag everything. And she'd once been pretty, maybe even beautiful. Not that it mattered. It would not have mattered if the grave beetles had nested in the arid blackness of her womb. It had all been written. Somewhere, some hand had put it all down in Ka's book. Her hands came up to her face, and there was still some juice left in her, enough to weep. "Don't look. You don't have to look at me so mean." "I'm sorry," the gunslinger said. "I didn't mean to be mean." "None of you mean it," she cried at him. "Close the place up and put out the lights." She wept, hands at her face. He was glad she had her hands at her face. Not because of the scar, but because it gave her back her maidenhood, if not her head. The pin that held the strap of her dress glittered in the greasy light. "Will he steal anything? I'll put him out if he will." "No," she whispered. "Nor don't steal." "Then put out the lights." She would not remove her hands until she was behind him, and she doused the lamps one by one, turning down the wicks and breathing the flames into extinction. Then she took his hand in the dark, and it was warm. She led him upstairs. There was no light to hide their act. 6. He made cigarettes in the dark, then lit them and passed one to her. The room held her scent, fresh lilac, pathetic. The smell of the desert had overlaid it. He realized he was afraid of the desert ahead. "His name is Nort," she said. No harshness had been worn out of her voice. "Just Nort. He died." The gunslinger waited. "He was touched by God." The gunslinger said, "I have never seen him." "He was here ever since I can remember. Nort, I mean, not God." She laughed jaggedly into the dark. "He had a honey wagon for a while. Started to drink, started to smell the grass, then to smoke it. The kids started to follow him around and sick their dogs onto him. He wore old green pants that stank. Do you understand? Yes. He started to chew it. At the last, he just sat in there and didn't eat anything. He might have been a king in his mind. The children might have been his jesters, and the dogs his princes. Yes. He died right in front of this place, she said. Came clumping down the boardwalk. His boots wouldn't wear out. They were engineer boots he found in the old train yard. With the children and dogs behind him, he looked like wire clothes hangers all wrapped and twirled together. You could see all the lights of hell in his eyes. But he was grinning, just like the grins the children carve into their sharp roots and pumpkins come reap. You could smell the dirt and the rot and the weed. It was running down from the corners of his mouth like green blood. I think he meant to come in and listen to Sheb play the piano. And right in front he stopped and cocked his head. I could see him, and I thought he heard a coach, although there was none due. Then he puked, and it was black and full of blood. It went right through that grin like sewer water through a grate. The stink was enough to make you want to run mad. He raised up his arms and just threw over. That was all. He died in his own vomit, with that grin on his face. A nice story. Oh, yes, thank ye, sigh. This be a nice place. She was trembling beside him. Outside, the wind kept up its steady whine, and somewhere far away a door was banging, like a sound heard in a dream. Mice ran in the walls. The gunslinger thought in the back of his mind that it was probably the only place in town prosperous enough to support mice. He put a hand on her belly, and she started violently, then relaxed. "The man in black," he said. "You have to have it, don't you? You couldn't just throw me a fuck and go to sleep." "I have to have it." "All right, I tell you." She grasped his hand in both of hers and told him. 7. He came in the late afternoon of the day Nort died, and the wind was whooping it up, pulling away the loose topsoil, sending sheets of grit and uprooted stalks of corn windmilling past. Jubal Kennerly had padlocked the livery, and the few other merchants had shuttered their windows and laid boards across the shutters. The sky was the yellow color of old cheese, and the clouds flew across it as if they had seen something horrifying in the desert wastes where they had so lately been. The gunslinger's quarry came in a rickety rig with a rippling tarp tied across its bed. There was a big howdy-do of a grin on his face. They watched him come, and old man Kennerly, lying by the window with a bottle in one hand and the loose, hot flesh of his second eldest daughter's left breast in the other, resolved not to be there if he should knock. But the man in black went by without slowing the bay that pulled his rig, and the spinning wheels spumed up dust that the wind clutched eagerly. He might have been a priest or a monk. He wore a black robe that had been flowered with dust, and a loose hood covered his head and obscured his features, but not that horrid, happy grin. The robe rippled and flapped. From beneath the garment's hem there peeped heavy, buckled boots with square toes. He pulled up in front of Sheb's and tethered the horse, which lowered its head and grunted at the ground. Around the back of the rig he untied one flap, found a weathered saddlebag, threw it over his shoulder, and went in through the bat-wings. Alice watched him curiously, but no one else noticed his arrival. The regulars were drunk as lords. Sheb was playing Methodist hymns ragtime, and the grizzled layabouts who had come in early to avoid the storm and to attend Nort's wake had sung themselves hoarse. Sheb, drunk nearly to the point of senselessness, intoxicated and horny with his own continued existence, played with hectic, shuttlecock speed, fingers flying like looms. Voices screeched and hollered, never overcoming the wind, but sometimes seeming to challenge it. In the corner, Zachary had thrown Amy Felden's skirts over her head and was painting reap charms on her knees. A few other women circulated. A fever seemed to be on all of them. The dull storm glow that filtered through the batwings seemed to mock them, however. Nort had been laid out on 2 tables in the center of the room. His engineer boots made a mystical V. His mouth hung open in a slack grin, although someone had closed his eyes and put slugs on them. His hands had been folded on his chest with a sprig of devil grass in them. He smelled like poison. The man in black pushed back his hood and came to the bar. Alice watched him, feeling trepidation mixed with the familiar want that hid within her. There was no religious symbol on him, although that meant nothing by itself. "Whiskey," he said. His voice was soft and pleasant. "I want the good stuff, honey." She reached under the counter and brought out a bottle of Star. She could have palmed off the local popskull on him as her best, but did not. She poured, and the man in black watched her. His eyes were large, luminous. The shadows were too thick to determine their color exactly. Her need intensified. The hollering and whooping went on behind, unabated. Sheb, the worthless gelding, was playing about the Christian soldiers, and somebody had persuaded Aunt Mill to sing. Her voice, warped and distorted, cut through the babble like a dull axe through a calf's brain. "Hey, Allie!" She went to serve, resentful of the stranger's silence, resentful of his no-color eyes and her own restless groin. She was afraid of her needs. They were capricious and beyond her control. They might be the signal of change, which would in turn signal the beginning of her old age, a condition which in Tull was usually as short and bitter as a winter sunset. She drew beer until the keg was empty, then broached another. She knew better than to ask Sheb. He would come willingly enough, like the dog he was, and would either chop off his own fingers or spume beer all over everything. The stranger's eyes were on her as she went about it. She could feel them. "It's busy," he said when she returned. He had not touched his drink, merely rolled it between his palms to warm it. "Wake," she said. "I noticed the departed." "They're bums," she said with sudden hatred. "All bums." "It excites them. He's dead, they're not. He was their butt when he was alive. It's not right that he should be their butt now. It's—" She trailed off, not able to express what it was or how it was obscene. "Weed-eater?" "Yes. What else did he have?" Her tone was accusing, but he did not drop his eyes, and she felt the blood rush to her face. "I'm sorry, are you a priest? This must revolt you." "I'm not, and it doesn't." He knocked the whiskey back neatly and did not grimace. "Once more, please. Once more with feeling, as they say in the world next door." She had no idea what that might mean, and was afraid to ask. "I'll have to see the color of your coin first. I'm sorry." "No need to be." He put a rough silver coin on the counter, thick on one edge, thin on the other, and she said, as she would say later, "I don't have change for this." He shook his head, dismissing it, and watched absently as she poured again. "Are you only passing through?" she asked. He did not reply for a long time, and she was about to repeat when he shook his head impatiently. "Don't talk trivialities. You're here with death." She recoiled, hurt and amazed, her first thought being that he had lied about his holiness to test her. "You cared for him," he said flatly. "Isn't that true?" "Who, Nort?" She laughed, affecting annoyance to cover her confusion. "I think you better—" "You're soft-hearted and a little afraid," he went on, and he was on the weed, looking out hell's back door. "And there he is. They've even slammed the door now, and you don't think they'll open it until it's time for you to walk through, isn't it so?" "What, are you drunk?" "Mr. Norton, he dayed," the man in black intoned, giving the words a sardonic little twist. "Dead as anybody. Dead as you or anybody." "Get out of my place." She felt a trembling loathing spring up in her, but the warmth still radiated from her belly. "It's all right," he said softly. "It's all right. Wait. Just wait." The eyes were blue. She felt suddenly easy in her mind, as if she had taken a drug. "Dead as anybody," he said. "Do you see?" She nodded dumbly, and he laughed aloud, a fine, strong, untainted laugh that swung heads around. He whirled and faced them, suddenly the center of attention. Aunt Mill faltered and subsided, leaving a cracked high note bleeding on the air. Sheb struck a discord and halted. They looked at the stranger uneasily. Sand rattled against the sides of the building. The silence held, spun itself out. Her breath had clogged in her throat, and she looked down and saw both hands pressed to her belly beneath the bar. They all looked at him, and he looked at them. Then the laugh burst forth again, strong, rich, beyond denial. But there was no urge to laugh along with him. "I'll show you a wonder," he cried at them. But they only watched him like obedient children taken to see a magician in whom they have grown too old to believe. The man in black sprang forward, and Aunt Mill drew away from him. He grinned fiercely and slapped her broad belly. A short, unwitting cackle was forced out of her, and the man in black threw back his head. "It's better, isn't it?" Aunt Mill cackled again, suddenly broke into sobs, and fled blindly through the doors. The others watched her go silently. The storm was beginning. Shadows followed each other, rising and falling on the white cyclorama of the sky. A man near the piano with a forgotten beer in one hand made a groaning, slobbering sound. The man in black stood over Nort, grinning down at him. The wind howled and shrieked and thrummed. Something large struck the side of the building, hard enough to make it shake, and then bounced away. One of the men at the bar tore himself free and headed for some quieter locale, moving in great, grotesque strides. Thunder racketed the sky with a sound like some god coughing. "All right," the man in black grinned. "All right, let's get down to it." He began to spit into Nort's face, aiming carefully. The spittle gleamed on the corpse's forehead, purled down the shaven beak of his nose. Under the bar, her hands worked faster. Sheb laughed, loon-like, and hunched over. He began to cough up phlegm, huge and sticky gobs of it, and let fly. The man in black roared approval and pounded him on the back. Sheb grinned, one gold tooth twinkling. Some fled. Others gathered in a loose ring around Nort. His face and the dew-lapped rooster wrinkles of his neck and upper chest gleamed with liquid so precious in this dry country. And suddenly the rain of spit stopped, as if on signal. There was ragged, heavy breathing. The man in black suddenly lunged across the body, jackknifing over it in a smooth arc. It was pretty, like a flash of water. He caught himself on his hands, sprang to his feet in a twist, grinning, and went over again. One of the watchers forgot himself, began to applaud, and suddenly backed away, eyes cloudy with terror. He slobbered a hand across his mouth and made for the door. Nort twitched. The third time the man in black went across. A sound went through the watchers, a grunt, and then they were silent. The man in black threw his head back and howled. His chest moved in a quick, shallow rhythm as he sucked air. He began to go back and forth at a faster clip, pouring over Nort's body like water poured from one glass to another, and then back again. The only sound in the room was the tearing rasp of his respiration and the rising pulse of the storm. There came the moment when Nort drew a deep, dry breath. His hands rattled and pounded aimlessly on the table. Sheb screeched and exited. One of the women followed him, her eyes wide and her wimple billowing. The man in black went across once more, twice, thrice. The body on the table was vibrating now, trembling and rapping and twitching like a large, yet essentially lifeless doll with some monstrous clockwork hidden inside. The smell of rot and excrement and decay billowed up in choking waves. There came a moment when his eyes opened. Allie felt her numb and feelingless feet propelling her backward. She struck the mirror, making it shiver, and blind panic took over. She bolted like a steer. "So here's your wonder," the man in black called after her, panting. "I've given it to you. Now you can sleep easy. Even that isn't irreversible. Although it's so goddamn funny." And he began to laugh again. The sound faded as she raced up the stairs, not stopping until the door to the 3 rooms above the bar was bolted. She began to giggle then. Rocking back and forth on her haunches by the door, the sound rose to a keening wail that mixed with the wind. She kept hearing the sound Nort had made when he came back to life, the sound of fists knocking blindly on the lid of a coffin. What thoughts, she wondered, could be left in his reanimated brain? What had he seen while dead? How much did he remember? Would he tell? Were the secrets of the grave waiting downstairs? The most terrible thing about such questions, she reckoned, was that part of you really wanted to ask. Below her, Nort wandered absently out into the storm to pull some weed. The man in black, now the only patron in the bar, perhaps watched him go, perhaps still grinning. When she forced herself to go back down that evening, carrying a lamp in one hand and a heavy stick of stove wood in the other, the man in black was gone, rig and all. But Nort was there, sitting at the table by the door as if he had never been away. The smell of the weed was on him, but not as heavily as she might have expected. He looked up at her and smiled tentatively. "Hello, Allie." "Hello, Nort." She put the stove wood down and began lighting the lamps, not turning her back to him. "I've been touched by God," he said presently. "I ain't going to die no more, he said so. It was a promise." "How nice for you, Nort." The spill she was holding dropped through her trembling fingers, and she picked it up. "I'd like to stop chewing the grass," he said. "I don't enjoy it no more. It don't seem right for a man touched by God to be chewing the weed." "Then why don't you stop?" Her exasperation had startled her into looking at him as a man again rather than an infernal miracle. What she saw was a rather sad-looking specimen, only half-stoned, looking hang-dog and ashamed. She could not be frightened by him any more. "I shake," he said, "and I want it. I can't stop. Allie, you was always good to me." He began to weep. "I can't even stop peeing myself. What am I? What am I?" She walked to the table and hesitated there, uncertain. "He could have made me not want it," he said through the tears. "He could have done that if he could have made me be alive. I ain't complaining. I don't want to complain." He stared around hauntedly and whispered, "He might strike me dead if I did." "Maybe it's a joke." He seemed to have quite a sense of humor. Nort took his poke from where it dangled inside his shirt and brought out a handful of grass. Unthinkingly, she knocked it away and then drew her hand back, horrified. "I can't help it, Allie. I can't." And he made a crippled dive for the poke. She could have stopped him, but she made no effort. She went back to lighting the lamps, tired although the evening had barely begun. But nobody came in that night except old man Kennerly, who had missed everything. He did not seem particularly surprised to see Nort. Perhaps someone had told him what had happened. He ordered beer, asked where Sheb was, and pawed her. Later, Nort came to her and held out a folded piece of paper in one shaky, no-right-to-be-alive hand. "He left you this," he said. "I near forgot. If I'd forgot, he would have come back and killed me, sure." Paper was valuable, a commodity much to be treasured, but she didn't like to handle this. It felt heavy, nasty. Written on it was a single word. Allie. "How do you know my name?" she asked Nort, and Nort only shook his head. She opened it and read this: "You want to know about death. I left him a word. That word is 19. If you say it to him, his mind will be opened. He will tell you what lies beyond. He will tell you what he saw. The word is 19. Knowing will drive you mad. But sooner or later, you will ask. You won't be able to help yourself. Have a nice day. Walter O'Dim. P.S. The word is 19. You will try to forget, but sooner or later it will come out of your mouth like vomit. 19. And oh dear God, she knew that she would. Already it trembled on her lips. 19, she would say. Nort, listen, 19. And the secrets of death and the land beyond would be open to her. Sooner or later you will ask. The next day things were almost normal, although none of the children followed Nort. The day after that the catcalls resumed. Life had gotten back on its own sweet keel. The uprooted corn was gathered together by the children, and a week after Nort's resurrection, they burned it in the middle of the street. The fire was momentarily bright, and most of the barflies stepped or staggered out to watch. They looked primitive. Their faces seemed to float between the flames and the ice-chip brilliance of the sky. Allie watched them and felt a pang of fleeting despair for the sad times of this world. The loss. Things had stretched apart. There was no glue at the center anymore. Somewhere something was tottering, and when it fell, all would end. She had never seen the ocean. Never would. If I had guts, she murmured. If I had guts. 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 Nort raised his head at the sound of her voice and smiled emptily at her from hell. She had no guts, only a bar and a scar and a word. It struggled behind her closed lips. Suppose she were to call him over now and draw him close, despite his stink. Suppose she said the word into the waxy bugger lug he called an ear. His eyes would change. They would turn into his eyes, those of the man in the robe. And then Nort would tell what he'd seen in the land of death, what lay beyond the earth and the worms. I'll never say that word to him. But the man who had brought Nort back to life and left her a note, left her a word like a cocked pistol she would someday put to her temple, had known better. 19 would open the secret. 19 was the secret. She caught herself writing it in a puddle on the bar. 19. And skidded it to nothingness when she saw Nort watching her. The fire burned down rapidly, and her customers came back in. She began to dose herself with the Star whiskey, and by midnight she was blackly drunk. 8. She ceased her narrative, and when he made no immediate comment, she thought at first that the story had put him to sleep. She began to drowse herself when he asked, "That's all?" "Yes, that's all. It's very late." He was rolling another cigarette. "Don't go getting your tobacco dandruff in my bed," she told him, more sharply than she had intended. "No." Silence again. The tip of his cigarette winked off and on. "You'll be leaving in the morning," she said dully. "I should. I think he's left a trap for me here, just like he left one for you." "Do you really think that number would—" "If you like your sanity, you don't ever want to say that word to Nort," the gunslinger said. "Put it out of your head. If you can, teach yourself that the number after 18 is 20, that half of 38 is 17. The man who signed himself Walter O'Dim is a lot of things, but a liar isn't one of them. But when the urge comes and it's strong, come up here and hide under your quilts and say it over and over again. Scream it if you have to, until the urge passes. A time will come when it won't pass." The gunslinger made no reply, for he knew this was true. The trap had a ghastly perfection. If someone told you you'd go to hell if you thought about seeing your mother naked, Once, when the gunslinger was very young, he had been told this very thing. You'd eventually do it. And why? Because you did not want to imagine your mother naked, because you did not want to go to hell. Because if given a knife and a hand in which to hold it, the mind would eventually eat itself. Not because it wanted to, because it did not want to. Sooner or later, Allie would call Nort over and say the word. "Don't go," she said. "We'll see." He turned on his side away from her, but she was comforted. He would stay, at least for a little while. She drowsed. On the edge of sleep, she thought again about the way Nort had addressed him in that strange talk. It was the only time she had seen her strange new lover express emotion. Even his love-making had been a silent thing. And only at the last had his breathing roughened and then stopped for a second or two. He was like something out of a fairy tale or a myth, a fabulous, dangerous creature. Could he grant wishes? She thought the answer was yes, and that she would have hers. He would stay a while. That was wish enough for a luckless, scarred bitch such as she. Tomorrow was time enough to think of another, or a third. She slept. 9. In the morning she cooked him grits, which he ate without comment. He shoveled them in without thinking about her, hardly seeing her. He knew he should go. Every minute he sat here, the man in black was further away, probably out of the hardpan and arroyos and into the desert by now. His path had been undeviatingly southeast, and the gunslinger knew why. "Do you have a map?" he asked, looking up. "Of the town?" She laughed. "There isn't enough of it to need a map." "No, of what's southeast of here." Her smile faded. "The desert. Just the desert. I thought you'd stay for a little." "What's on the other side of the desert?" "How would I know? Nobody crosses it. Nobody's tried since I was here." She wiped her hands on her apron, got potholders, and dumped the tub of water she had been heating into the sink, where it splashed and steamed. "The clouds all go that way. It's like something sucks them." He got up. "Where are you going?" She heard the shrill fear in her voice and hated it. "To the stable. If anyone knows, the hostler will." He put his hands on her shoulders. The hands were hard, but they were also warm. "And to arrange for my mule. If I'm going to be here, he should be taken care of. For when I leave." "But not yet." She looked up at him. "But you watch that, Kennerly. If he doesn't know a thing, he'll make it up." "Thank you, Allie." When he left, she turned to the sink, feeling the hot, warm drift of her grateful tears. How long since anyone had thanked her? Someone who mattered. 10. Kennerly was a toothless and unpleasant old satyr who had buried 2 wives and was plagued with daughters. 2 half-grown ones peeked at the gunslinger from the dusty shadows of the barn. A baby drooled happily in the dirt. A full-grown one, blonde, dirty, and sensual, watched with a speculative curiosity as she drew water from the groaning pump beside the building. She caught the gunslinger's eye, pinched her nipples between her fingers, dropped him a wink, and then went back to pumping. The hostler met him halfway between the door to his establishment and the street. His manner vacillated between a kind of hateful hostility and craven fawning. "It's being cared for, never fear it," he said, and before the gunslinger could reply, Kennerly turned on his daughter with his fists up, a desperate, scrawny rooster of a man. "You get in, Subi! You get right the hell in!" Subi began to drag her bucket sullenly toward the shack appended to the barn. "You meant my mule," the gunslinger said. "Yes, sire. Ain't seen no mule in quite a time, especially one that looks as threaded as yourn. 2 eyes, 4 legs." His face squinched together alarmingly in an expression meant to convey either extreme pain or the notion that a joke had been made. The gunslinger assumed it was the latter, although he had little or no sense of humor himself. "Time was they used to grow up wild for want of 'em," Kennerly continued. "But the world has moved on. Ain't seen nothing but a few muty oxen and the coach horses and Subi, I'll whale you, 'fore God." "I don't bite," the gunslinger said pleasantly. Kennelly cringed and grinned. The gunslinger saw the murder in his eyes quite clearly, and although he did not fear it, he marked it as a man might mark a page in a book, one that contained potentially valuable instructions. "It ain't you, gods, no, it ain't you," he grinned loosely. "She just naturally gawky. She got a devil, she wild." His eyes darkened. "It's coming to last times, mister. You know how it says in the book, children won't obey their parents, and a plague will be visited on the multitudes. You only have to listen to the preacher woman to know it." The gunslinger nodded, then pointed southeast. "What's out there?" Kennelly grinned again, showing gums and a few sociable yellow teeth. "Dwellers. Weed, desert. What else?" He cackled, and his eyes measured the gunslinger coldly. "How big is the desert?" "Big." Kennelly endeavored to look serious, as if answering a serious question. "Maybe 1,000 wheels, maybe 2,000. I can't tell you, mister. There's nothing out there but devil grass and maybe demons. Heard there was a speaking ring somewheres on the far side, but that is probably a lie. That's the way the other fellow went. The one who fixed up Naughty when he was sick." "Sick? I heard he was dead." Kennelly kept grinning. Well, maybe. But we're growed-up men, ain't we?" "But you believe in demons." Kennelly looked affronted. "That's a lot different. Preacher woman says—" He blathered and palavered ever onward. The gunslinger took off his hat and wiped his forehead. The sun was hot, beating steadily. Kennelly seemed not to notice. Kennelly had a lot to say, none of it sensible. In the thin shadow by the livery, the baby girl was gravely smearing dirt on her face. The gunslinger finally grew impatient and cut the man off in mid-spate. "You don't know what's after the desert?" Kennelly shrugged. "Some might. The coach ran through part of it 50 years ago. My pap said so. He used to say 'twas mountains. Others say an ocean, a green ocean with monsters. And some say that's where the world ends, that there ain't nothing but lights that'll drive a man blind and the face of God with his mouth open to eat him up." "Drivel," the gunslinger said shortly. "Sure it is," Kennelly cried happily. He cringed again, hating, fearing, wanting to please. "You see, my mule is looked after." He flicked Kennelly another coin, which Kennelly caught on the fly. The gunslinger thought of the way a dog will catch a ball. "Surely. You staying a little?" "I guess I might. There'll be water." "If God wills it. Sure. Kennelly laughed unhappily, and his eyes went on wanting the gunslinger stretched out dead at his feet. "That alley's pretty nice when she wants to be, ain't she?" The hostler made a loose circle with his left fist and began poking his right finger rapidly in and out of it. "Did you say something?" the gunslinger asked remotely. Sudden terror dawned in Kennelly's eyes, like twin moons coming over the horizon. He put his hands behind his back like a naughty child caught with the jam jar. "No, shy, not a word, and I'm right sorry if I did." He caught sight of Subi leaning out a window and whirled on her. "I'll wear you now, you little slut whore! 'Fore God, I'll—" The gunslinger walked away, aware that Kennelly had turned to watch him, aware of the fact that he could whirl and catch the hostler with some true and untinctured emotion distilled on his face. Why bother? It was hot, and he knew what the emotion would be. Just hate. Hate of the outsider. He'd gotten all the man had to offer. The only sure thing about the desert was its size. The only sure thing about the town was that it wasn't all played out here. Not yet. 11. He and Allie were in bed when Sheb kicked the door open and came in with the knife. It had been 4 days, and they had gone by in a blinking haze. He ate, he slept, he had sex with Allie. He found that she played the fiddle, and he made her play it for him. She sat by the window in the milky light of daybreak, only a profile, and played something haltingly that might have been good if she'd had some training. He felt a growing, but strangely absent-minded affection for her, and thought this might be the trap the man in black had left behind. He walked out sometimes. He thought very little about everything. He didn't hear the little piano player come up. His reflexes had sunk. That didn't seem to matter either, although it would have frightened him badly in another time and place. Allie was naked, the sheet below her breasts, and they were preparing to make love.
"Please," she was saying, "like before. I want that. I want—"
The door crashed open, and the piano player made his ridiculous, knock-kneed run for the sun. Allie did not scream, although Sheb held an 8-inch carving knife in his hand. He was making a noise, an inarticulate blabbering. He sounded like a man being drowned in a bucket of mud. Spittle flew. He brought the knife down with both hands, and the gunslinger caught his wrists and turned them. The knife went flying. Sheb made a high, screeching noise like a rusty screen door. His hands fluttered in marionette movements, both wrists broken. The wind gritted against the window. Allie's looking-glass on the wall, faintly clouded and distorted, reflected the room. "She was mine," he wept. "She was mine first, mine." Allie looked at him and got out of bed. She put on a wrapper, and the gunslinger felt a moment of empathy for a man who must be seeing himself coming out on the far end of what he once had. He was just a little man, and the gunslinger suddenly knew where he had seen him before. Known him before. "It was for you," Sheb sobbed. "It was only for you, Allie. It was you first, and it was all for you. Oh, God, dear God." The words dissolved into a paroxysm of unintelligibilities, finally to tears. He rocked back and forth, holding his broken wrists to his belly. "Shh, let me see." She knelt beside him. "Broken? Sheb, you ass! How will you make your living now? Didn't you know you were never strong?" She helped him to his feet. He tried to hold his hands to his face, but they would not obey, and he wept nakedly. "Come on over to the table and let me see what I can do." She led him to the table and set his wrists with slats of kindling from the firebox. He wept weakly and without volition. "Magus," the gunslinger said, and the little piano player looked around, eyes wide. The gunslinger nodded, amiably enough now that Sheb was no longer trying to stick a knife in his lights. "Magus," he said again, "on the clean sea. What about it? You were there, weren't you? Many and many as they did say." "What if I was? I don't remember you." "But you remember the girl, don't you? The girl named Susan? And Reap Night?" His voice took on an edge. "Were you there for the bonfire?" The little man's lips trembled. They were covered with spit. His eyes said he knew the truth. He was closer to dead now than when he'd come bursting in with a knife in his hand. "Get out of here," the gunslinger said. Understanding dawned in Sheb's eyes. "But you was just a boy. One of them 3 boys. You come to count stock, and Eldred Jonas was there, the coffin hunter, and—" "Get out while you still can," the gunslinger said, and Sheb went, holding his broken wrists before him. She came back to the bed. "What was that about?" "Never mind," he said. "All right. Then where were we?" "Nowhere." He rolled on his side, away from her. She said patiently, "You knew about him and me. He did what he could, which wasn't much, and I took what I could because I had to. There's nothing to be done. What else is there?" She touched his shoulder. "Except I'm glad that you're so strong." "Not now," he said. "Who was she?" And then, answering her own question, "A girl you loved." "Leave it, Allie." "I can make you strong." "No," he said. "You can't do that." 12. The next night the bar was closed. It was whatever passed for the Sabbath in Tull. The gunslinger went to the tiny, leaning church by the graveyard while Allie washed tables with strong disinfectant and rinsed kerosene lamp chimneys in soapy water. An odd purple dusk had fallen, and the church, lit from the inside, looked almost like a blast furnace from the road. "I don't go," Allie had said shortly. "The woman who preaches has poison religion. Let the respectable ones go." He stood in the vestibule, hidden in a shadow, looking in. The pews were gone, and the congregation stood. He saw Kennerly and his brood, Kastner, owner of the town's scrawny dry goods emporium, and his slat-sided wife, a few barflies, a few town women he had never seen before, and, surprisingly, Sheb. They were singing a hymn raggedly, a cappella. He looked curiously at the mountainous woman at the pulpit. Allie had said she lives alone, hardly ever sees anybody, only comes out on Sunday to serve up the hellfire. Her name is Sylvia Pittston. She's crazy, but she's got the hoodoo on them. They like it that way. It suits them. No description could take the measure of the woman. Breasts like earthworks, a huge pillar of a neck overtopped by a pasty white moon of a face in which blinked eyes so large and so dark that they seemed to be bottomless tarns. Her hair was a beautiful rich brown, and it was piled atop her head in a haphazard sprawl, held by a hairpin almost big enough to be a meat skewer. She wore a dress that seemed to be made of burlap. The arms that held the hymnal were slabs. Her skin was creamy, unmarked, lovely. He thought that she must top 300 pounds. He felt a sudden red lust for her that made him feel shaky, and he turned his head and looked away. Shall we gather at the river, the beautiful, the river? Shall we gather at the river that flows by the kingdom of God? The last note of the last chorus faded off, and there was a moment of shuffling and coughing. She waited. When they were settled, she spread her hands over them as if in benediction. It was an evocative gesture. "My dear little brothers and sisters in Christ." It was a haunting line. For a moment the gunslinger felt mixed feelings of nostalgia and fear, stitched in with an eerie feeling of déjà vu. He thought, I dreamed this. Or I was here before. If so, when? Not Megis. No, not there. He shook the feeling off. The audience, perhaps 25 all told, had become dead silent. Every eye touched the preacher woman. The subject of our meditation tonight is the interloper. Her voice was sweet, melodious, the speaking voice of a well-trained contralto. A little rustle ran through the audience. "I feel," Sylvia Pittston said reflectively, "that I know almost everyone in the good book personally. In the last 5 years, I have worn out 3 of them, precious though any book be in this ill world, and unaccountable numbers before that. I love the story, and I love the players in that story. I have walked arm in arm in the lion's den with Daniel. I stood with David when he was tempted by Bathsheba as she bathed at the pool. I have been in the fiery furnace with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I slew 2,000 with Samson when he swung the jawbone and was blinded with St. Paul on the road to Damascus. I wept with Mary at Golgotha." A soft, shirring sigh in the audience. "I have known and loved them. There is only one," she held up a finger, "only one player in the greatest of all dramas that I do not know. Only one who stands outside with his face in the shadow. Only one who makes my body tremble and my spirit quail. I fear him. I don't know his mind, and I fear him. I fear the interloper." Another sigh. One of the women had put a hand over her mouth as if to stop a sound, and was rocking. "The interloper, who came to Eve as a snake on its belly in the dust, grinning and writhing. The interloper who walked among the children of Israel while Moses was up on the mount, who whispered to them to make a golden idol, a golden calf, and to worship it with foulness and fornication." Moans, nods. "The interloper. He stood on the balcony with Jezebel and watched as King Ahaz fell screaming to his death.
and he and she grinned as the dogs gathered and lapped up his blood. Oh, my little brothers and sisters, watch thou for the interloper. Yes, oh Jesus! This was the man the gunslinger had first noticed coming into town, the one with the straw hat. He's always been there, my brothers and sisters. But I don't know his mind, and you don't know his mind. Who could understand the awful darkness that swirls there, the pride and the titanic blasphemy, the unholy glee, and the madness, the gibbering madness that walks and crawls and wriggles through men's most awful wants and desires? Oh, Jesus, Savior, it was him who took our Lord up on the mountain. Yes, it was him that tempted him and shewed him all the world and the world's pleasures. Yes, it's him that will return when last times come on the world. And they are coming, my brothers and sisters. Can't you feel they are? Yes! Rocking and sobbing, the congregation became a sea. The woman seemed to point at all of them and none of them. It's him that will come as the Antichrist, a crimson king with bloody eyes, to lead men into the flaming bowels of perdition, to the bloody end of wickedness, as star wormwood hangs blazing in the sky, as gall gnaws at the vitals of the children, as women's wombs give forth monstrosities, as the works of men's hands turn to blood. Ah, God. Ah! A woman fell on the floor, her legs crashing up and down against the wood. One of her shoes flew off. It's him that stands behind every fleshly pleasure, him who made the machines with La Merc stamped on them, him, the interloper. La Merc, the gunslinger thought. Or maybe she said Le Marc. The word had some vague resonance for him, but nothing he could put his finger on. Nonetheless, he filed it away in his memory, which was capacious. "Yes, Lord!" they were screaming. A man fell on his knees, holding his head and braying. "When you take a drink, who holds the bottle? The interloper. When you sit down to a faro or a watchmate table, who turns the cards? The interloper. When you riot in the flesh of another's body, when you pollute yourself with your solitary hand, to whom do you sell your soul? Oh, Jesus! Oh, loper! Oh! And who is he?" she cried, but calm within. He could sense the calmness, the mastery, the control and domination. He thought suddenly, with terror and absolute surety, that the man who called himself Walter had left a demon in her. She was haunted. He felt the hot ripple of sexual desire again through his fear, and thought this was somehow like the word the man in black had left in Allie's mind, like a loaded trap. The man who was holding his head crashed and blundered forward. "I'm in hell!" he screamed up at her, his face twisted and writhed, as if snakes crawled beneath his skin. "I done fornications, I done gambling, I done weed, I done sins, But his voice rose skyward in a dreadful hysterical wail that drowned articulation. He held his head as if it would burst like an overripe cantaloupe at any moment. The audience stilled as if a cue had been given, frozen in their half-erotic poses of ecstasy. Sylvia Pittston reached down and grasped his head. The man's cry ceased as her fingers, strong and white, unblemished and gentle, worked through his hair. He looked up at her dumbly. "Who was with you in sin?" she asked. Her eyes looked into his, deep enough, gentle enough, cold enough to drown in. The interloper." "Called who?" "Called Lord High Satan." Raw, oozing whisper. "Will you renounce?" Eagerly. Yes, oh my Jesus Savior." She rocked his head. He stared at her with the blank, shiny eyes of the zealot. "If he walked through that door," she hammered a finger at the vestibule shadows where the gunslinger stood, "would you renounce him to his face?" "On my mother's name." "Do you believe in the eternal love of Jesus?" He began to weep. "You're fucking I do." "He forgives you that, Johnson." "Praise God," Johnson said, still weeping. "I know he forgives you, just as I know he will cast out the unrepentant from his palaces and into the place of burning darkness beyond the end of end world." "Praise God," The congregation, drained, spoke it solemnly. "Just as I know this interloper, this Satan, this lord of flies and serpents, will be cast down and crushed. Will you crush him if you see him, Johnson?" "Yes, and praise God," Johnson wept, "with both feet." "Will you crush him if you see him, brothers and sisters?" "Yes," sated. "If you see him sashaying down Main Street tomorrow?" "Praise God." The gunslinger faded back out the door and headed for town. The smell of the desert was clear in the air. Almost time to move on. Almost. 13. In bed again. "She won't see you," Allie said. She sounded frightened. "She doesn't see anybody. She only comes out on Sunday evenings to scare the hell out of everybody."
"How long has she been here?"
12 years, or maybe only 2. Time's funny, as thou knows. Let's not talk about her."
"Where did she come from? Which direction?"
"I don't know."
"Lying. Allie?"
"I don't know."
"Allie?"
All right. She came from the dwellers, from the desert."
"I thought so." He relaxed a little. Southeast, in other words. Along the path he followed. The one he could even see in the sky sometimes. And he guessed the preacher woman had come a lot further than from the dwellers or even the desert. How had she traveled so far? By way of some old machine that still worked? A train, mayhap? Where does she live?
Her voice dropped a notch. "If I tell you, will you make love to me?"
"I'll make love to you anyway, but I want to know."
Allie sighed. It was an old yellow sound like turning pages. "She has a house over the knoll in back of the church, a little shack. It's where the real minister used to live until he moved out. Is that enough? Are you satisfied?"
"No, not yet." And he rolled on top of her. 14. It was the last day, and he knew it. The sky was an ugly, bruised purple, weirdly lit from above with the first fingers of dawn. Allie moved about like a wraith, lighting lamps, tending corn fritters that sputtered in the skillet. He had loved her hard after she had told him what he had to know, and she had sensed the coming end and had given more than she had ever given. And she had given it with desperation against the coming of dawn, given it with the tireless energy of 16. But she was pale this morning, on the brink of menopause again. She served him without a word. He ate rapidly, chewing, swallowing, chasing each bite with hot coffee. Allie went to the bat wings and stood staring out at the morning, at the silent battalions of slow-moving clouds. "It's going to dust up today." "I'm not surprised."
"Are you ever?" she asked ironically, and turned to watch him get his hat. He clapped it on his head and brushed past her.
"Sometimes," he told her.
He only saw her once more alive.
15. By the time he reached Sylvia Pittston's shack, the wind had died utterly, and the whole world seemed to wait. He had been in desert country long enough to know that the longer the lull, the harder the blow when it finally came. A queer, flat light hung over everything. There was a large wooden cross nailed to the door of the place, which was leaning and tired. He rapped and waited. No answer. He rapped again. No answer. He drew back and kicked in the door with one hard shot of his right boot. A small bolt on the inside ripped free. The door banged against a haphazardly planked wall and scared rats into skittering flight. Sylvia Pittston sat in the hall, in a mammoth ironwood rocker, and looked at him calmly with those great and dark eyes. The stormlight fell on her cheeks in crazy half-tones. She wore a shawl. The rocker made tiny squeaking noises. They looked at each other for a long, clockless moment.
"You will never catch him," she said. "You walk in the way of evil." "He came to you," the gunslinger said, "and to my bed. He spoke to me in the tongue, the high speech. He screwed you, in every sense of the word." She did not flinch. "You walk an evil way, gunslinger. You stand in shadows. You stood in the shadows of the holy place last night. Did you think I couldn't see you?"
"Why did he heal the weed-eater?"
"He's an angel of God. He said so."
"I hope he smiled when he said it." She drew her lip back from her teeth in an unconsciously feral gesture.
"He told me you would follow. He told me what to do. He said you are the Antichrist."
The gunslinger shook his head. "He didn't say that." She smiled up at him lazily.
"He said you would want to bed me. Is it true?"
"Did you ever meet a man who didn't want to bed you?"
"The price of my flesh would be your life, gunslinger. He has got me with child, not his, but the child of a great king. If you invade me—"
She let the lazy smile complete her thought. At the same time she gestured with her huge, mountainous thighs. They stretched beneath her garment like pure marble slabs. The effect was dizzying. The gunslinger dropped his hands to the butts of his pistols. "You have a demon, woman, not a king. Yet fear not. I can remove it." The effect was instantaneous. She recoiled against the chair, and a weasel look flashed on her face.
"Don't touch me. Don't come near me. You dare not touch the bride of God."
"Want to bet?" the gunslinger said. He stepped toward her. As the gambler said when he laid down a handful of cups and wands, "Just watch me." The flesh on the huge frame quaked. Her face had become a caricature of terror, and she stabbed the sign of the eye at him with pronged fingers. "The desert," the gunslinger said. "What after the desert?"
"You'll never catch him. Never, never. You'll burn. He told me so."
"I'll catch him," the gunslinger said. "We both know it. What is beyond the desert?"
"No."
"Answer me."
"No."
He slid forward, dropped to his knees, and grabbed her thighs. Her legs locked like a vice. She made strange, lustful, keening noises. "The demon, then," he said. "Out it comes."
"No."
He pried the legs apart and unholstered one of his guns.
"No, no, no."
Her breath came in short, savage grunts. "Answer me." She rocked in the chair, and the floor trembled. Prayers and garbled bits of scripture flew from her lips. He rammed the barrel of the gun forward. He could feel the terrified wind sucked into her lungs more than he could hear it. Her hands beat at his head, her legs drummed against the floor, and at the same time the huge body tried to suck the invader in. Outside, nothing watched them but the bruised and dusty sky. She screamed something, high and inarticulate. "What?"
"Mountains."
"What about them?"
"He stops on the other side. Sweet Jesus! To make his strength meditation. Do you understand? Oh, I'm...
The whole huge mountain of flesh suddenly strained forward and upward, yet he was careful not to let her secret flesh touch him. Then she seemed to wilt and grow smaller, and she wept with her hands in her lap. "So," he said, getting up, "the demon is served, eh?"
"Get out. You've killed the child of the Crimson King. But you will be repaid. I set my watch and warrant on it. Now get out. Get out."
He stopped at the door and looked back. "No child," he said briefly. "No angel, prince, no demon."
"Leave me alone."
He did. 16. By the time he arrived at Kennelly's, a queer obscurity had come over the northern horizon, and he knew it was dust. Over Tull, the air was still dead quiet. Kennerly was waiting for him on the chaff-strewn stage that was the floor of his barn. "Leaving?" He grinned abjectly at the gunslinger. "Yeah. Not before the storm. Ahead of it. The wind goes faster than any man on a mule. In the open, it can kill you." "I want the mule now," the gunslinger said simply. "Sure." But Kennerly did not turn away, merely stood as if searching for something further to say, grinning his groveling, hate-filled grin, and his eyes flicked up and over the gunslinger's shoulder. The gunslinger sidestepped and turned at the same time, and the heavy stick of stovewood that the girl Subi held swished through the air, grazing his elbow only. She lost hold of it with the force of her swing, and it clattered over the floor. In the explosive height of the loft, barn swallows took shadowed wing. The girl looked at him bovinely, her breasts thrust with overripe grandeur at the wash-faded shirt she wore. One thumb sought the haven of her mouth with dreamlike slowness. The gunslinger turned back to Kennerly. Kennerly's grin was huge. His skin was waxy yellow. His eyes rolled in their sockets. He began in a phlegm-filled whisper and could not continue. "The mule," the gunslinger prodded gently. Sure, Kennerly whispered, the grin now touched with incredulity that he should still be alive. He shuffled to get it. The gunslinger moved to where he could watch the man go. The hostler brought the mule back and handed him the bridle. "You get it and tend your sister," he said to Subi. Subi tossed her head and didn't move. The gunslinger left them there, staring at each other across the dusty, droppings-strewn floor, he with a sick grin, she with dumb, inanimate defiance. Outside, the heat was still like a hammer. 17. He walked the mule up the center of the street, his boots sending up squirts of dust. His water bags, swollen with water, were strapped across the mule's back. He stopped at the tonk, but Allie was not there. The place was deserted, battened down for the storm, but still dirty from the night before. It stank of sour beer. He filled his tote sack with cornmeal, dried and roasted corn, and half of the raw hamburg in the cooler. He left 4 gold pieces stacked on the planked counter. Allie did not come down. Sheb's piano bid him a silent, yellow-toothed toodaloo. He stepped back out and cinched the tote sack across the mule's back. There was a tight feeling in his throat. He might still avoid the trap, but the chances were small. He was, after all, the interloper. He walked past the shuttered, waiting buildings, feeling the eyes that peered through cracks and chinks. The man in black had played God in Tull. He had spoken of a king's child, a red prince. Was it only a sense of the cosmic comic, or a matter of desperation? It was a question of some importance. There was a shrill, harried scream from behind him, and doors suddenly threw themselves open. Forms lunged. The trap was sprung. Men in long handles and men in dirty dungarees, women in slacks and in faded dresses, even children tagging after their parents, and in every hand there was a chunk of wood or a knife. His reaction was automatic, instantaneous, inbred. He whirled on his heels while his hands pulled the guns from their holsters, the butts heavy and sure in his hands. It was Allie. And of course it had to be Allie, coming at him with her face distorted, the scar a hellish purple in the lowering light. He saw that she was held hostage. The distorted, grimacing face of Sheb peered over her shoulder like a witch's familiar. She was his shield and sacrifice. He saw it all, clear and shadowless, in the frozen, deathless light of the sterile calm, and heard her. "Kill me, Roland, kill me. I said the word, 19, I said, and he told me. I can't bear it." The hands were trained to give her what she wanted. He was the last of his breed, and it was not only his mouth that knew the high speech. The guns beat their heavy, eight-tonal music into the air. Her mouth flapped, and she sagged, and the guns fired again. The last expression on her face might have been gratitude. Sheb's head snapped back. They both fell into the dust. "They've gone to the land of 19, he thought. "Whatever is there, Sticks flew through the air, rained on him. He staggered, fended them off. One with a nail pounded raggedly through it, ripped at his arm and drew blood. A man with a beard stubble and sweat-stained armpits lunged, flying at him with a dull kitchen knife held in one paw. The gunslinger shot him dead, and the man thumped into the street. His false teeth shot out as his chin struck, and grinned, spit shiny in the dirt. "Satan!" someone was screaming. "The accursed! Bring him down!" "The interloper!" another voice cried. Sticks rained on him. A knife struck his boot and bounced. "The interloper! The Antichrist!" He blasted his way through the middle of them, running as the bodies fell, his hands picking the targets with ease and dreadful accuracy. 2 men and a woman went down, and he ran through the hole they left. He led them a feverish parade across the street and toward the rickety general store barber shop that faced Sheb's. He mounted the boardwalk, turned again, and fired the rest of his loads into the charging crowd. Behind them, Sheb and Allie and the others lay crucified in the dust. They never hesitated or faltered, although every shot he fired found a vital spot, and they had probably never seen a gun. He retreated, moving his body like a dancer to avoid the flying missiles. He reloaded as he went, with a rapidity that had also been trained into his fingers. They shuttled busily between gun belts and cylinders. The mob came up over the boardwalk, and he stepped into the general store and rammed the door closed. The large display window to the right shattered inward, and 3 men crowded through. Their faces were zealously blank, their eyes filled with bland fire. He shot them all, and the 2 that followed them. They fell in the window, hung on the jutting shards of glass, choking the opening. The door crashed and shuddered with their weight, and he could hear her voice. "The killer! Your souls! The cloven hoof!" The door ripped off its hinges and fell straight in, making a flat hand clap. Dust puffed up from the floor. Men, women, and children charged him. Spittle and stove wood flew. He shot his guns empty, and they fell like 9 pins in a game of points. He retreated into the barber shop, shoving over a flour barrel, rolling it at them, throwing a pan of boiling water that contained 2 nicked straight-razors. They came on, screaming with frantic incoherency. From somewhere, Sylvia Pittston exhorted them, her voice rising and falling in blind inflections. He pushed shells into hot chambers, smelling the aromas of shave and tonsure, smelling his own flesh as the calluses at the tips of his fingers singed. He went through the back door and onto the porch. The flat scrubland was at his back now, flatly denying the town that crouched against its dirty haunch. 3 men hustled around the corner with large betrayer grins on their faces. They saw him seeing them, and the grins curdled in the second before he mowed them down. A woman had followed them, howling. She was large and fat, and known to the patrons of Sheb's as Aunt Mill. The gunslinger blew her backwards, and she landed in a whorish sprawl, her skirt rucked up between her thighs. He went down the steps and walked backwards into the desert, 10 paces, 20. The back door of the barber shop flew open, and they boiled out. He caught a glimpse of Sylvia Pittston. He opened up. They fell in squats. They fell backwards. They tumbled over the railing into the dust. They cast no shadows in the deathless purple light of the day. He realized he was screaming. He had been screaming all along. His eyes felt like cracked ball bearings. His balls had drawn up against his belly. His legs were wood. His ears were iron. The guns were empty, and they boiled at him, transmogrified into an eye and a hand, and he stood, screaming and reloading, his mind far away and absent, letting his hands do their reloading trick. Could he hold up a hand, tell them he had spent 1,000 years learning this trick and others, tell them of the guns and the blood that had blessed them? Not with his mouth, but his hands could speak their own tale. They were in throwing range as he finished reloading, and a stick struck him on the forehead and brought blood in abraded drops. In 2 seconds they would be in gripping distance. In the forefront he saw Kennerly. Kennerly's younger daughter, perhaps 11, Subi, 2 male barflies, a whore named Amy Felden. He let them all have it, and the ones behind them. Their bodies thumped like scarecrows. Blood and brains flew in streamers. They halted for a moment, startled, the mob face shivering into individual, bewildered faces. A man ran in a large, screaming circle. A woman with blisters on her hands turned her head up and cackled feverishly at the sky. The man whom he had first seen sitting gravely on the steps of the mercantile store made a sudden and amazing load in his pants. He had time to reload one gun. Then it was Sylvia Pittston, running at him, waving a wooden cross in each hand. "Devil! Devil! Devil! Child killer! Monster! Destroy him, brothers and sisters! Destroy the child-killing interloper!" He put a shot into each of the cross pieces, blowing the roods to splinters, and 4 more into the woman's head. She seemed to accordion into herself and waver like a shimmer of heat. They all stared at her for a moment in tableau, while the gunslinger's fingers did their reloading trick. The tips of his fingers sizzled and burned. Neat circles were branded into the tips of each one. There were fewer of them now. He had run through them like a mower's scythe. He thought they would break with the woman dead, but someone threw a knife. The hilt struck him squarely between the eyes and knocked him over. They ran at him in a reaching, vicious clot. He fired his guns empty again, lying in his own spent shells. His head hurt, and he saw large brown circles in front of his eyes. He missed with one shot, downed 11 with the rest. But they were on him, the ones that were left. He fired the 4 shells he had reloaded, and then they were beating him, stabbing him. He threw a pair of them off his left arm and rolled away. His hands began doing their infallible trick. He was stabbed in the shoulder. He was stabbed in the back. He was hit across the ribs. He was stabbed in the ass with what might have been a meat fork. A small boy squirmed at him and made the only deep cut across the bulge of his calf. The gunslinger blew his head off. They were scattering, and he let them have it again, back shooting now. The ones left began to retreat toward the sand-colored, pitted buildings, and still their hands did their business, like over-eager dogs that want to do their rolling-over trick for you, not once or twice, but all night, and the hands were cutting them down as they ran. The last one made it as far as the steps of the barber shop's back porch, and then the gunslinger's bullet took him in the back of the head. "Yelp!" the man cried, and fell over. It was Tull's final word on the business. Silence came back in, filling jagged spaces. The gunslinger was bleeding from perhaps 20 different wounds, all of them shallow except for the cut across his calf. He bound it with a strip of shirt, and then straightened and examined his kill. They trailed in a twisting, zigzagging path from the back door of the barber shop to where he stood. They lay in all positions. None of them seemed to be sleeping. He followed the trail of death, counting as he went. In the general store, one man sprawled with his arms wrapped lovingly around the cracked candy jar he had dragged down with him. He ended up where he had started, in the middle of the deserted Main Street. He had shot and killed 39 men, 14 women, and 5 children. He had shot and killed everyone in Tull. A sickish sweet odor came to him on the first of the dry, stirring wind. He followed it, then looked up and nodded. The decaying body of Nort was spread-eagled atop the plank roof of Sheb's, crucified with wooden pegs. Mouth and eyes were open. The mark of a large and purple cloven hoof had been pressed into the skin of his grimy forehead. The gunslinger walked out of town. His mule was standing in a clump of weed about 40 yards further along the remnant of the coach road. The gunslinger led it back to Kennelly's stable. Outside, the wind was playing a jag-time tune. He put the mule up for the time being and went back to the tonk. He found a ladder in the back shed, went up to the roof, and cut Nort loose. The body was lighter than a bag of sticks. He tumbled it down to join the common people, those who would only have to die once. Then he went back inside, ate hamburgers, and drank 3 beers while the light failed and the sand began to fly. That night he slept in the bed where he and Allie had lain. He had no dreams. The next morning the wind was gone, and the sun was its usual bright and forgetful self. The bodies had gone south like tumbleweeds with the wind. At mid-morning, after he had bound all his cuts, he moved on as well. 18. He thought Brown had fallen asleep. The fire was down to no more than a spark, and the bird Zoltan had put his head under his wing. Just as he was about to get up and spread a pallet in the corner, Brown said, "There! You've told it. Do you feel better?" The gunslinger started. "Why would I feel bad?" "You're human, you said. No demon. Or did you lie?" "I didn't lie." He felt the grudging admittance in him. He liked Brown, honestly did, and he hadn't lied to the dweller in any way. "Who are you, Brown? Really, I mean." "Just me," he said, unperturbed. "Why do you have to think you're in the middle of such a mystery?" The gunslinger lit a smoke without replying. "I think you're very close to your man in black," Brown said. "Is he desperate?" "I don't know." "Are you?" "Not yet," the gunslinger said. He looked at Brown with a shade of defiance. "I go where I have to go. Do what I have to do." "That's good, then," Brown said, and turned over and went to sleep. 19. The next morning Brown fed him and sent him on his way. In the daylight he was an amazing figure with his scrawny, sunburnt chest, pencil-like collarbones, and loony shock of red hair, the bird perched on his shoulder. "The mule?" the gunslinger asked. "I'll eat it," Brown said. "Okay." Brown offered his hand, and the gunslinger shook it. The dweller nodded to the southeast. "Walk easy. Long days and pleasant nights." "May you have twice the number." They nodded at each other, and then the man Allie had called Roland walked away, his body festooned with guns and water. He looked back once. Brown was rooting furiously at his little corn bed. The crow was perched on the low roof of his dwelling, like a gargoyle. 20. The fire was down, and the stars had begun to pale off. The wind walked restlessly, told its tale to no one. The gunslinger twitched in his sleep and was still again. He dreamed a thirsty dream. In the darkness, the shape of the mountains was invisible. Any thoughts of guilt, any feelings of regret had faded. The desert had baked them out. He found himself thinking more and more about Court, who had taught him to shoot. Court had known black from white. He stirred again and woke. He blinked at the dead fire with its own shape superimposed over the other, more geometrical one. He was a romantic. He knew it, and he guarded the knowledge jealously. It was a secret he had shared with only a few over the years. The girl named Susan, the girl from Edgis, had been one of them. That, of course, made him think of Court again. Court was dead. They were all dead, except for him. The world had moved on. The gunslinger shouldered his gunner and moved on with it. Chapter 2. The Way Station. 1. A nursery rhyme had been playing itself through his mind all day, the maddening kind of thing that will not let go, that mockingly ignores all commands of the conscious mind to cease and desist. The rhyme was, "The rain in Spain falls on the plain. There is joy and also pain, but the rain in Spain falls on the plain. Time's a sheet, life's a stain. All the things we know will change, and all those things remain the same. But be ye mad or only sane, the rain in Spain falls on the plain. We walk in love, but fly in chains, and the plains in Spain fall in the rain." He didn't know what a plain was in the context of the rhyme's last couplet, but knew why the rhyme had occurred to him in the first place. There had been the recurring dream of his room in the castle, and of his mother, who had sung it to him as he lay solemnly in the tiny bed by the window of many colors. She did not sing it at bedtimes, because all small boys born to the high speech must face the dark alone. But she sang to him at nap times, and he could remember the heavy gray rain light that shivered into rainbows on the counterpane. He could feel the coolness of the room and the heavy warmth of blankets, love for his mother and her red lips, the haunting melody of the little nonsense lyric, and her voice. Now, It came back maddeningly, like a dog chasing its own tail in his mind as he walked. All his water was gone, and he knew he was very likely a dead man. He had never expected it to come to this, and he was sorry. Since noon he had been watching his feet rather than the way ahead. Out here, even the devil grass had grown stunted and yellow. The hardpan had disintegrated in places to mere rubble. The mountains were not noticeably clear, although 16 days had passed since he had left the hut of the last homesteader, a loony, sane young man on the edge of the desert. He had had a bird, the gunslinger remembered, but he couldn't remember the bird's name. He watched his feet move up and down like the heddles of a loom, listened to the nonsense rhyme sing itself into a pitiful garble in his mind, and wondered when he would fall down for the first time. He didn't want to fall. Even though there was no one to see him, it was a matter of pride. A gunslinger knows pride, that invisible bone that keeps the neck stiff. What hadn't come to him from his father had been kicked into him by Court, a boy's gentleman if there ever was one. Court, with his red bulb of a nose and his scarred face. He stopped and looked up suddenly. It made his head buzz, and for a moment his whole body seemed to float. The mountains dreamed against the far horizon, but there was something else up ahead, something much closer, perhaps only 5 miles away. He squinted at it, but his eyes were sandblasted and going glare-blind. He shook his head and began to walk again. The rhyme circled and buzzed. About an hour later he fell down and skinned his hands. He looked at the tiny beads of blood on his flaked skin with disbelief. The blood looked no thinner. It looked like any blood, now dying in the air. It seemed almost as smug as the desert. He dashed the drops away, hating them blindly. Smug? Why not? The blood was not thirsty. The blood was being served. The blood was being made sacrifice unto. Blood sacrifice. All the blood needed to do was run, and run, and run. He looked at the splotches that had landed on the hardpan and watched as they were sucked up with uncanny suddenness. How do you like that, blood? How does that suit you? Oh, Jesus, I'm far gone. He got up, holding his hands to his chest, and the thing he'd seen earlier was almost in front of him, so close it made him cry out, a dust-choked crow croak. It was a building. No, 2 buildings, surrounded by a fallen rail fence. The wood seemed old, fragile to the point of elvishness. It was wood being transmogrified into sand. One of the buildings had been a stable. The shape was clear and unmistakable. The other was a house, or an inn, a way station for the coach line. The tottering sand house, the wind had crusted the wood with grit until it looked like a sand castle that the sun had beat upon at low tide and hardened to a temporary abode, cast a thin line of shadow, and someone sat in the shadow, leaning against the building, and the building seemed to lean with the burden of his weight. Him, then, at last, the man in black. The gunslinger stood with his hands to his chest, unaware of his declamatory posture, and gawped. But instead of the tremendous winging excitement he had expected, or perhaps fear or awe, there was nothing but the dim atavistic guilt for the sudden raging hate of his own blood moments earlier, and the endless ring-a-rosy of the childhood song, The Rain in Spain. He moved forward, drawing one gun. Falls on the plain. He came the last quarter-mile at a jolting, flat-footed run, not trying to hide himself. There was nothing to hide behind. His short shadow raced him. He was not aware that his face had become a gray and dusty death mask of exhaustion. He was aware of nothing but the figure in the shadow. It did not occur to him until later that the figure might even have been dead. He kicked through one of the leaning fence rails. It broke in two without a sound, almost apologetically, and lunged across the dazzled and silent stable yard, bringing the gun up. "You're covered! You're covered! Hands up, you whoreson! You're—" The figure moved restlessly and stood up. The gunslinger thought, "My God, he is worn away to nothing. What's happened to him?" Because the man in black had shrunk 2 full feet, and his hair had gone white. He paused, Struck dumb, his head buzzing tunelessly, his heart was racing at a lunatic rate, and he thought, "I'm dying right here." He sucked the white-hot air into his lungs and hung his head for a moment. When he raised it again, he saw it wasn't the man in black, but a boy with sun-bleached hair, regarding him with eyes that did not even seem interested. The gunslinger stared at him blankly and then shook his head in negation. But the boy survived his refusal to believe. He was a strong delusion, one wearing blue jeans with a patch on one knee and a plain brown shirt of rough weave. The gunslinger shook his head again and started for the stable with his head lowered, gun still in hand. He couldn't think yet. His head was filled with motes, and there was a huge, thrumming ache building in it. The inside of the stable was silent and dark and exploding with heat. The gunslinger stared around himself with huge, floating wall eyes. He made a drunken about-face and saw the boy standing in the ruined doorway, staring at him. A blade of pain slipped smoothly into his head, cutting from temple to temple, dividing his brain like an orange. He reholstered his gun, swayed, put out his hands as if to ward off phantoms, and fell over on his face. Two. When he woke up, he was on his back, and there was a pile of light, odorless hay beneath his head. The boy had not been able to move him, but he had made him reasonably comfortable, and he was cool. He looked down at himself and saw that his shirt was dark and wet. He looked at his face and tasted water. He blinked at it. His tongue seemed to swell in his mouth. The boy was hunkered down beside him. When he saw the gunslinger's eyes were open, he reached behind him and gave the gunslinger a dented tin can filled with water. He grasped it with trembling hands and allowed himself to drink a little, just a little. When that was down and sitting in his belly, he drank a little more. Then he spilled the rest over his face and made shocked, blowing noises. The boy's pretty lips curved in a solemn little smile. "Would you want something to eat, sir?" "Not yet," the gunslinger said. There was still a sick ache in his head from the sunstroke, and the water sat uneasily in his stomach as if it did not know where to go. "Who are you?" "My name is John Chambers. You can call me Jake. I have a friend, well, sort of a friend. She works for us, who calls me Bama sometimes, but you can call me Jake." The gunslinger sat up, and the sick ache became hard and immediate. He leaned forward and lost a brief struggle with his stomach. "There's more," Jake said. He took the can and walked toward the rear of the stable. He paused and smiled back at the gunslinger uncertainly. The gunslinger nodded at him and then put his head down and propped it with his hands. The boy was well made, handsome, perhaps 10 or 11. There had been a shadow of fear on his face, but that was all right. The gunslinger would have trusted him far less if the boy hadn't shown fear. A strange, thumping hum began at the rear of the stable. The gunslinger raised his head alertly, hands going to the butts of his guns. The sound lasted for perhaps 15 seconds and then quit. The boy came back with the can, filled now. The gunslinger drank sparingly again, and this time it was a little better. The ache in his head was fading. "I didn't know what to do with you when you fell down," Jake said. "For a couple of seconds there I thought you were going to shoot me." "Maybe I was. I thought you were somebody else." "The priest?" The gunslinger looked up sharply. The boy studied him, frowning. "He camped in the yard. I was in the house over there. Or maybe it was a depot. I didn't like him, so I didn't come out. He came in the night and went on the next day. I would have hidden from you, but I was sleeping when you came." He looked darkly over the gunslinger's head. "I don't like people. They fuck me up." "What did he look like?" The boy shrugged. "Like a priest. He was wearing black things." "A hood and a cassock?" "What's a cassock?" "A robe, like a dress." The boy nodded. "That's about right." The gunslinger leaned forward, and something in his face made the boy recoil a little. "How long ago? Tell me, for your father's sake." I Patiently, the gunslinger said, "I'm not going to hurt you." "I don't know. I can't remember time. Every day's the same." For the first time, the gunslinger wondered consciously how the boy had come to this place, with dry and man-killing leagues of desert all around it. But he would not make it his concern, not yet, at least. "Make your best guess. Long ago?" "No, not long. I haven't been here long." The fire lit in him again. He snatched up the can and drank from it with hands that trembled the smallest bit. A fragment of the cradle song recurred, but this time, instead of his mother's face, he saw the scarred face of Alice, who had been his Jilly in the now-defunct town of Tull. "A week? 2? 3? The boy looked at him distractedly. "Yes." "Which?" "A week or 2. He looked aside, blushing a little. 3 poops ago. That's the only way I can measure things now." He didn't even drink. "I thought he might be the ghost of a priest, like in this movie I saw once, only Zorro figured out he wasn't a priest at all, or a ghost either. He was just a banker who wanted some land because there was gold on it. Mrs. Shaw took me to see that movie. It was in Times Square." None of this made any sense to the gunslinger, so he did not comment on it. "I was scared," the boy said. "I've been scared almost all the time." His face quivered like crystal on the edge of the ultimate destructive high note. "He didn't even build a fire. He just sat there. I don't even know if he went to sleep." Close. Closer than he had ever been, by the gods. In spite of his extreme dehydration, his hands felt faintly moist, greasy. "There's some dried meat," the boy said. "All right." The gunslinger nodded. "Good." The boy got up to fetch it, his knees popping slightly. He made a fine, straight figure. The desert had not yet sapped him. His arms were thin, but the skin, although tanned, had not dried and cracked. "He's got juice," the gunslinger thought. "Mayhap some sand in his craw as well, or he would have taken one of my guns and shot me right where I lay." Or perhaps the boy simply hadn't thought of it. The gunslinger drank from the can again. Sand in his craw or not, he didn't come from this place. Jake came back with a pile of dried jerky on what looked like a sun-scoured breadboard. The meat was tough, stringy, and salty enough to make the cankered lining of the gunslinger's mouth sing. He ate and drank until he felt logy, and then settled back. The boy ate only a little, picking at the dark strands with an odd delicacy. The gunslinger regarded him, and the boy looked back at him candidly enough. "Where did you come from, Jake?" he asked finally. "I don't know." The boy frowned. "I did know. I knew when I came here, but it's all fuzzy now, like a bad dream when you wake up. I have lots of bad dreams. Mrs. Shaw used to say it was because I watched too many horror movies on Channel 11. "What's a channel?" A wild idea occurred to him. "Is it like a beam?" "No, it's TV." "What's TV?" The boy touched his forehead. "Pictures." "Did somebody tote you here, this Mrs. Shaw?" "No," the boy said. "I just was here." "Who is Mrs. Shaw?" "I don't know." "Why did she call you Bama?" "I don't remember." "You're not making any sense," the gunslinger said flatly. Quite suddenly the boy was on the verge of tears. "I can't help it. I was just here. If you asked me about TV and channels yesterday, I bet I still could have remembered. Tomorrow I probably won't even remember I'm Jake. Not unless you tell me, and you won't be here, will you? You're going to go away and I'll starve because you ate up almost all my food. I didn't ask to be here. I don't like it. It's spooky." "Don't feel so sorry for yourself. Make do." "I didn't ask to be here," the boy repeated with bewildered defiance. The gunslinger ate another piece of the meat. Chewing the salt out of it before swallowing, the boy had become part of it, and the gunslinger was convinced he told the truth. He had not asked for it. It was too bad. He himself, he had asked for it. But he had not asked for the game to become this dirty. He had not asked to turn his guns on the townsfolk of Tull. Had not asked to shoot Allie with her sadly pretty face at the end, marked by the secret she had finally asked to be let in on, using that word, that 19, like a key in a lock. Had not asked to be faced with a choice between duty and flat-out murder. It was not fair to ring in innocent bystanders and make them speak lines they didn't understand on a strange stage. Allie, he thought. Allie was at least part of this world in her own self-illusory way. But this boy, this goddamned boy... "Tell me what you can remember," he told Jake. "It's only a little. It doesn't seem to make any sense anymore. Tell me. Maybe I can pick up the sense." The boy thought about how to begin. He thought about it very hard. "There was a place, the one before this one, a high place with lots of rooms and a patio where you could look at tall buildings and water. There was a statue that stood in the water." "A statue in the water?" "Yes. A lady with a crown and a torch and, I think, a book." "Are you making this up?" "I guess I must be," the boy said hopelessly. "There were things to ride in on the streets, big ones and little ones. The big ones were blue and white, the little ones were yellow, a lot of yellow ones. I walked to school. There were cement paths beside the streets, windows to look in, and more statues wearing clothes. The statues sold the clothes. I know it sounds crazy, but the statues sold the clothes." The gunslinger shook his head and looked for a lie on the boy's face. He saw none. "I walked to school," the boy repeated doggedly, "and I had a—" His eyes tilted, closed, and his lips moved gropingly. "A brown book bag. I carried a lunch, and I wore—" The groping again, agonized groping. "A tie." "A cravat?" "I don't know." The boy's fingers made a slow, unconscious clinching motion at his throat, one the gunslinger associated with hanging. "I don't know. It's just all gone." And he looked away. "May I put you to sleep?" the gunslinger asked. "I'm not sleepy." "I can make you sleepy, and I can make you remember." Doubtfully, Jake asked, "How could you do that?" "With this." The gunslinger removed one of the shells from his gun belt and twirled it in his fingers. The movement was dexterous, as flowing as oil. The shell cartwheeled effortlessly from thumb and index to index and second to second and ring to ring and pinky. It popped out of sight and reappeared, seemed to float briefly, then reversed. The shell walked across the gunslinger's fingers. The fingers themselves marched as his feet had marched on his last miles to this place. The boy watched, his initial doubt first replaced with plain delight, then by raptness, then by dawning blankness, as he opened. His eyes slipped shut. The shell danced back and forth. Jake's eyes opened again, caught the steady, limpid movement between the gunslinger's fingers a little while longer, and then they closed once more. The gunslinger continued the how-can, but Jake's eyes did not open again. The boy breathed with slow and steady calmness. Did this have to be part of it? Yes, it did. There was a certain cold beauty to it, like the lacy frettings that fringe hard blue ice packs. He once more seemed to hear his mother singing, not the nonsense about the rain in Spain this time, but sweeter nonsense coming from a great distance as he rocked on the rim of sleep. "Baby bunting, baby dear. Baby, bring your basket here." Not for the first time the gunslinger tasted the smooth, loaden taste of soul-sickness. The shell in his fingers, manipulated with such unknown grace, was suddenly horrific, the spoor of a monster. He dropped it into his palm, made a fist, and squeezed it with painful force. Had it exploded, in that moment he would have rejoiced at the destruction of his talented hand, for its only true talent was murder. There had always been murder in the world, but telling himself so was no comfort. There was murder, there was rape. There were unspeakable practices, and all of them were for the good, the bloody good, the bloody myth, for the Grail, for the Tower. Ah, the Tower stood somewhere in the middle of things, so they did say, rearing its black-grey bulk to the sky, and in his desert-scoured ears the gunslinger heard the faint, sweet sound of his mother's voice. "Chuzzit, chizzit, chazzit, bring enough to fill your basket." He brushed the song and the sweetness of the song aside. "Where are you?" he asked. 3. Jake Chambers, sometimes Bama, is going downstairs with his book bag. There is earth science, there is geography, there is a notepad, a pencil, a lunch his mother's cook, Mrs. Greta Shaw, has made for him in the chrome and formica kitchen, where a fan whirs eternally, sucking up alien odors. In his lunch sack he has a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, a bologna lettuce and onion sandwich, and 4 Oreo cookies. His parents do not hate him, but they do seem to have overlooked him. They have abdicated and left him to Mrs. Greta Shaw, to nannies, to a tutor in the summer, and the Piper School, which is private and nice, and most of all white, the rest of the time. None of these people have ever pretended to be more than what they are, professional people, the best in their fields. None have folded him to a particularly warm bosom, as usually happens in the historical romance novels his mother reads, and which Jake has dipped into, looking for the hot parts. Hysterical novels, his father sometimes calls them, and sometimes bodice-rippers. "You should talk," his mother says with infinite scorn from behind some closed door where Jake listens. His father works for the network, and Jake could pick him out of a lineup of skinny men with crew cuts. Probably. Jake does not know that he hates all the professional people, but Mrs. Shaw. People have always bewildered him. His mother, who is scrawny in a sexy way, often goes to bed with sick friends. His father sometimes talks about people at the network who are doing too much Coca-Cola. This statement is always accompanied by a humorless grin and a quick little sniff of the thumbnail. Now he's on the street. Jake Chambers is on the street. He has hit the bricks. He is clean and well-mannered, comely, sensitive. He bowls once a week at Midtown Lanes. He has no friends, only acquaintances. He has never bothered to think about this, but it hurts him. He does not know or understand that a long association with professional people has caused him to take on many of their traits. Mrs. Greta Shaw, better than the rest of them, but gosh, is that ever a consolation prize, makes very professional sandwiches. She quarters them and cuts off the bread crusts so that when he eats in the gym period 4, he looks like he ought to be at a cocktail party with a drink in his other hand instead of a sports novel or a Clay Blaisdell Western from the school library. His father makes a great deal of money because he is a master of the kill, that is, placing a stronger show on his network against a weaker show on a rival network. His father smokes 4 packs of cigarettes a day. His father does not cough, but he has a hard grin, and he's not averse to the occasional shot of the old Coca-Cola. Down the street. His mother leaves cab fare, but he walks every day, it doesn't rain, swinging his book bag and sometimes his bowling bag, although mostly he leaves it in his locker, a small boy who looks very American with his blonde hair and blue eyes. Girls have already begun to notice him, with their mother's approval, and he does not shy away with skittish little boy arrogance. He talks to them with unknowing professionalism and puzzles them away. He likes geography and bowling in the afternoon. His father owns stock in a company that makes automatic pin-setting machinery, but Midtown Lanes does not use his father's brand. He does not think he has thought about this, but he has. Walking down the street, he passes Bloomy's, where the models stand dressed in fur coats, in 6-button Edwardian suits, some in nothing at all, some are bare naked. These models, these mannequins, are perfectly professional, and he hates all professionalism. He is too young to have learned to hate himself yet, but that seed is already there. Given time, it will grow and bear bitter fruit. He comes to the corner and stands with his book bag at his side. Traffic roars by, grunting blue and white buses, yellow taxis, Volkswagens, a large truck. He is just a boy, but not average. And he sees the man who kills him out of the corner of his eye. It is the man in black. And he doesn't see the face, only the swirling robe, the outstretched hands, and the hard, professional grin. He falls into the street with his arms outstretched, not letting go of the book bag which contains Mrs. Greta Shaw's extremely professional lunch. There's a brief glance through a polarized windshield at the horrified face of a businessman wearing a dark blue hat in the band of which is a small, jaunty feather. Somewhere, a radio is blasting rock and roll. An old woman on the far curb screams. She's wearing a black hat with a net. Nothing jaunty about that black net. It is like a mourner's veil. Jake feels nothing but surprise, and his usual sense of headlong bewilderment. Is this how it ends? Before he's bowled better than 270? He lands hard in the street and looks at an asphalt-sealed crack some 2 inches from his eyes. The book bag is jolted from his hand. He is wondering if he has skinned his knees when the car belonging to the businessman wearing the blue hat with the jaunty feather passes over him. It is a big blue 1976 Cadillac with white-wall Firestone tires. The car is almost exactly the same color as the businessman's hat. It breaks Jake's back, mushes his guts to gravy, and sends blood from his mouth in a high-pressure jet. He turns his head and sees the Cadillac's flaming taillights and smoke spurting from beneath its locked rear wheels. The car has also run over his book bag and left a wide black tread on it. He turns his head the other way and sees a large gray Ford screaming to a stop inches from his body. A black fellow who has been selling pretzels and sodas from a pushcart is coming toward him on the run. Blood runs from Jake's nose, ears, eyes, rectum. His genitals have been squashed. He wonders irritably how badly he has skinned his knees. He wonders if he'll be late for school. Now the driver of the Cadillac is running toward him, babbling. Somewhere a terrible, calm voice, the voice of doom, says, "I am a priest. Let me through. An act of contrition." He sees the black robe and knows sudden horror. It is him, the man in black. Jake turns his face away with the last of his strength. Somewhere a radio is playing a song by the rock group Kiss. He sees his own hand trailing on the pavement, small, white, shapely. He has never bitten his nails. Looking at his hand, Jake dies. 4. The gunslinger hunkered in frowning thought. He was tired, and his body ached, and the thoughts came with aggravating slowness. Across from him, the amazing boy slept with his hands folded in his lap, still breathing calmly. He had told his tale without much emotion, although his voice had trembled near the end, when he had come to the part about the priest and the act of contrition. He had not, of course, told the gunslinger about his family and his own sense of bewildered dichotomy, but that had seeped through anyway, enough for the gunslinger to make out its shape. The fact that there had never been such a city as the boy described, unless it was the mythic city of Lud, was not the most upsetting part of the story, but it was disturbing. It was all disturbing. The gunslinger was afraid of the implications. "Jake?" "Uh-huh." "Do you want to remember this when you wake up, or forget it?" "Forget it," the boy said promptly. "When the blood came out of my mouth, I could taste my own shit." "All right. You're going to sleep, understand? Real sleep now. Go ahead and lie over, if it do please you." Jake laid over, looking small and peaceful and harmless. The gunslinger did not believe he was harmless. There was a deadly feeling about him, the stink of yet another trap. He didn't like the feeling, but he liked the boy. He liked him a great deal. "Jake?" "Shh, I'm sleeping. I want to sleep." "Yes, and when you wake up, you won't remember any of this." "'Kay, good." The gunslinger watched him for a brief time, thinking of his own boyhood, which usually seemed to have happened to another person. to a person who had leaped through some fabulous lens of time to become someone else, but which now seemed poignantly close. It was very hot in the stable of the way station, and he carefully drank some more water. He got up and walked to the back of the building, pausing to look into one of the horse stalls. There was a small pile of white hay in the corner, and a neatly folded blanket, but there was no smell of horse. There was no smell of anything in the stable. The sun had bled away every smell and left nothing. The air was perfectly neutral. At the back of the stable was a small, dark room with a stainless steel machine in the center. It was untouched by rust or rot. It looked like a butter churn. At the left, a chrome pipe jutted from it, terminating over a drain in the floor. The gunslinger had seen pumps like it in other dry places, but never one so big. He could not contemplate how deep some long gone, they must have drilled before they struck water, secret and forever black under the desert. Why hadn't they removed the pump when the way station had been abandoned? Demons, perhaps. He shuddered abruptly, an abrupt twisting of his back. Heat flesh poked out on his skin, then receded. He went to the control switch and pushed the on button. The machine began to hum. After perhaps half a minute, a stream of cool, clear water belched from the pipe and went down the drain to be recirculated. Perhaps 3 gallons flowed out of the pipe before the pump shut itself down with a final click. It was a thing as alien to this place and time as true love, and yet as concrete as a judgment, a silent reminder of the time when the world had not yet moved on. It probably ran on an atomic slug, as there was no electricity within 1,000 miles of here, and even dry batteries would have lost their charge long ago. It had been made by a company called North Central Positronics. The gunslinger didn't like it. He went back and sat down beside the boy, who had put one hand under his cheek. Nice-looking boy. The gunslinger drank some more water and crossed his legs, so he was sitting Indian fashion. The boy, like the squatter on the edge of the desert who kept the bird, Zoltan, the gunslinger remembered abruptly, the bird's name was Zoltan, had lost his sense of time. But the fact that the man in black was closer seemed beyond doubt. Not for the first time, the gunslinger wondered if the man in black was letting him catch up for some reason of his own. Perhaps the gunslinger was playing into his hands. He tried to imagine what the confrontation might be like, and could not. He was very hot, but no longer felt sick. The nursery rhyme occurred to him again, but this time, instead of his mother, he thought of Court. Court, an ageless engine of a man, his face stitched with the scars of bricks and bullets and blunt instruments, the scars of war and instruction in the arts of war. He wondered if Court had ever had a love to match those monumental scars. He doubted it. He thought of Susan and his mother and of Martin, that incomplete enchanter. The gunslinger was not a man to dwell on the past. Only a shadowy conception of the future and of his own emotional make-up saved him from being a man without imagination, a dangerous dullard. His present run of thought, therefore, rather amazed him. Each name called up others. Cuthbert, Allen, the old man Jonas with his quavery voice, and again Susan, the lovely girl at the window. Such thoughts always came back to Susan, and the great rolling plain known as the Drop, and fishermen casting their nets in the bays on the edge of the clean sea. The piano player in Tull, also dead, all dead in Tull, and by his hand, had known those places, although he and the gunslinger had only spoken of them that once. Sheb had been fond of the old songs, had once played them in a saloon called The Traveller's Rest, and the gunslinger hummed one tunelessly under his breath. Love, oh, careless love, see what careless love has done. The gunslinger laughed, bemused. I am the last of that green and warm-hued world. And for all his nostalgia, he felt no self-pity. The world had moved on mercilessly, but his legs were still strong, and the man in black was closer. The gunslinger nodded out. "5. When he awoke, it was almost dark, and the boy was gone. The gunslinger got up, hearing his joints pop, and went to the stable door. There was a small flame dancing in darkness on the porch of the inn. He walked toward it, his shadow long and black and trailing in the reddish ochre light of sunset. Jake was sitting by a kerosene lamp. "The oil was in a drum," he said, "but I was scared to burn it in the house. Everything's so dry." "You did just right." The gunslinger sat down, seeing but not thinking about the dust of years that puffed up around his rump. He thought it something of a wonder that the porch didn't simply collapse beneath their combined weight. The flame from the lamp shadowed the boy's face with delicate tones. The gunslinger produced his poke and rolled a cigarette. "We have to palaver," he said. Jake nodded, smiling a little at the word. "I guess you know I'm on the prod for that man you saw." "Are you going to kill him?" "I don't know. I have to make him tell me something. I may have to make him take me someplace." "Where?" "To find a tower," the gunslinger said. He held his cigarette over the chimney of the lamp and drew on it. The smoke drifted away on the rising night breeze. Jake watched it. His face showed neither fear nor curiosity, certainly not enthusiasm. "So I'm going on tomorrow," the gunslinger said. "You'll have to come with me. How much of that meat is left?" "Only a little." "Corn?" "A little more." The gunslinger nodded. "Is there a cellar?" "Yes." Jake looked at him. The pupils of his eyes had grown to a huge, fragile size. "You pull up on a ring in the floor, but I didn't go down. I was afraid the ladder would break and I wouldn't be able to get up again. And it smells bad. It's the only thing around here that smells at all." "We'll get up early and see if there's anything down there worth taking. Then we'll go." "All right." The boy paused and then said, "I'm glad I didn't kill you when you were sleeping. I had a pitchfork and I thought about doing it, but I didn't, and now I won't have to be afraid to go to sleep." "What would you be afraid of?" The boy looked at him ominously. "Spooks. Of him coming back." "The man in black," the gunslinger said, not a question. "Yes. Is he a bad man?" "I guess that depends on where you're standing," the gunslinger said absently. He got up and pitched his cigarette out onto the hardpan. "I'm going to sleep." The boy looked at him timidly. "Can I sleep in the stable with you?" "Of course." The gunslinger stood on the steps, looking up, and the boy joined him. Old Star was up there, and Old Mother. It seemed to the gunslinger that if he closed his eyes, he would be able to hear the croaking of the first spring peepers, smell the green, almost summer smell of the court lawns after their first cutting, and hear, perhaps, the indolent click of wooden balls as the ladies of the East Wing, attired only in their shifts as dusk glimmered toward dark, played at points. Could almost see Cuthbert and Jamie as they came through the break in the hedges, calling for him to ride out with them. It was not like him to think so much of the past. He turned back and picked up the lamp. "Let's go to sleep," he said. They crossed to the stable together. 6. The next morning, he explored the cellar. Jake was right, it smelled bad. It had a wet, swampy stench that made the gunslinger feel nauseous and a little lightheaded after the antiseptic odorlessness of the desert in the stable. The cellar smelled of cabbages and turnips and potatoes with long, sightless eyes gone to everlasting rot. The ladder, however, seemed quite sturdy, and he climbed down. The floor was earthen, and his head almost touched the overhead beams. Down here, spiders still lived, disturbingly big ones with mottled gray bodies. Many were muties, the true thread long lost. Some had eyes on stalks, some had what might have been as many as 16 legs. The gunslinger peered around and waited for his night eyes. "You all right?" Jake called down nervously. "Yes." He focused on the corner. "There are cans. Wait." He went carefully to the corner, ducking his head. There was an old box with one side folded down. The cans were vegetables, green beans, yellow beans, and 3 cans of corned beef. He scooped up an armload and went back to the ladder. He climbed halfway up and handed them to Jake, who knelt to receive them. He went back for more. It was on the 3rd trip that he heard the groaning in the foundations. He turned, looked, and felt a kind of dreamy terror wash over him, a feeling both languid and repellent. The foundation was composed of huge sandstone blocks that had probably been evenly cornered when the way station was new, but which were now at every zigzag, drunken angle. It made the wall look as if it were inscribed with strange, meandering hieroglyphics. And from the joining of 2 of these abstruse cracks, a thin spall of sand was running, as if something on the other side was digging itself through with slobbering, agonized intensity. The groaning rose and fell, becoming louder, until the whole cellar was full of the sound, an abstract noise of ripping pain and dreadful effort. "Come up!" Jake screamed. "Oh, Jesus, mister, come up!" "Go away," the gunslinger said calmly. "Wait outside. If I don't come up by the time you count to 300, get the hell out." "Come up!" Jake screamed again. The gunslinger didn't answer. He pulled leather with his right hand. There was a hole as big as a coin in the wall now. He could hear, through the curtain of his own terror, Jake's pattering feet as the boy ran. Then the spill of sand stopped. The groaning ceased, but there was a sound of steady, labored breathing. "Who are you?" the gunslinger asked. No answer. And in the high speech, his voice filling with the old thunder of command, Roland demanded, "Who are you, demon? Speak if you would speak. My time is short, my patience shorter." "Go slow," a dragging, clotted voice said from within the wall. And the gunslinger felt the dream-like terror deepen and grow almost solid. It was the voice of Alice, the woman he had stayed with in the town of Tull, but she was dead. He had seen her go down himself, a bullet hole between her eyes. Fathoms seemed to swim by his eyes, descending. "Go slow, past the drawers, gunslinger. Watch for the tahine. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket." "What do you mean? Speak on." But the breathing was gone. The gunslinger stood for a moment, frozen, and then one of the huge spiders dropped on his arm and scrambled frantically up to his shoulder. With an involuntary grunt he brushed it away and got his feet moving. He did not want to do the next thing, but custom was strict, inviolable. "Take the dead from the dead," the old proverb said. Only a corpse may speak true prophecy. He went to the hole and punched at it. The sandstone crumbled easily at the edges, and with a bare stiffening of muscles, he thrust his hand through the wall and touched something solid, with raised and fretted knobs. He drew it out. He held a jawbone, rotted at the far hinge. The teeth leaned this way and that. "All right," he said softly. He thrust it rudely into his back pocket and went back up the ladder, carrying the last cans awkwardly. He left the trapdoor open. The sun would get in and kill the muty spiders. Jake was halfway across the stable yard, cowering on the cracked, rubbly hardpan. He screamed when he saw the gunslinger, backed away a step or two, and then ran to him, crying. "I thought it got you, that it got you. I thought—" "It didn't. Nothing got me." He held the boy to him, feeling his face hot against his chest and his hands dry against his ribcage. He could feel the rapid beating of the boy's heart. It occurred to him later that this was when he began to love the boy, which was, of course, what the man in black must have planned. all along. Was there ever a trap to match the trap of love? Was it a demon? The voice was muffled. Yes, a speaking demon. We don't have to go back there anymore. Come on, let's shake a mile. They went to the stable, and the gunslinger made a rough pack from the blanket he'd slept under. It was hot and prickly, but there was nothing else. That done, he filled the water bags from the pump. You carry one of the water bags, the gunslinger said. Wear it around your shoulders, see? Yes. The boy looked up at him worshipfully, the look quickly masked. He slung one of the bags over his shoulders. Is it too heavy? No, it's fine. Tell me the truth now. I can't carry you if you get a sunstroke. I won't have a sunstroke. I'll be okay. The gunslinger nodded. We're going to the mountains, aren't we? Yes. They walked out into the steady smash of the sun. Jake, his head as high as the swing of the gunslinger's elbows, walked to his right and a little ahead, the rawhide-wrapped ends of the water bag hanging nearly to his shins. The gunslinger had crisscrossed 2 more water bags across his shoulders and carried the sling of food in his armpit, his left arm holding it against his body. In his right hand was his pack, his poke, and the rest of his gunna. They passed through the far gate of the way station and found the blurred ruts of the stage track again. They had walked perhaps 15 minutes when Jake turned around and waved at the 2 buildings. They seemed to huddle in the titanic space of the desert. "Goodbye," Jake cried. "Goodbye." Then he turned back to the gunslinger, looking troubled. "I feel like something's watching us." "Something or someone," the gunslinger agreed. Was someone hiding there? Hiding there all along? I don't know. I don't think so. Should we go back? Go back and no. We're done with that place. Good, Jake said fervently. They walked. The stage track breasted a frozen sand drumlin, and when the gunslinger looked around, the way station was gone. Once again there was the desert, and that only. 7. They were 3 days out of the way station. The mountains were deceptively clear now. They could see the smooth, stepped rise of the desert into foothills, the first naked slopes, the bedrock bursting through the skin of the earth in sullen, eroded triumph. Further up, the land gentled off briefly again, and for the first time in months or years, the gunslinger could see real, living green. Grass, dwarf spruces, perhaps even willows, all fed by snow runoff from further up. Beyond that, the rock took over again, rising in cyclopean, tumbled splendor all the way to the blinding snowcaps. Off to the left, a huge slash showed the way to the smaller, eroded sandstone cliffs and mesas and buttes on the far side. This draw was obscured in the almost continual gray membrane of showers. At night, Jake would sit fascinated for the few minutes before he fell into sleep, watching the brilliant sword-play of the far-off lightning, white and purple, startling in the clarity of the night air. The boy was fine on the trail. He was tough, but more than that, he seemed to fight exhaustion with a calm reservoir of will which the gunslinger appreciated and admired. He didn't talk much, and he didn't ask questions. Not even about the jawbone, which the gunslinger turned over and over in his hands during his evening smoke. He caught a sense that the boy felt highly flattered by the gunslinger's companionship, perhaps even exalted by it, and this disturbed him. The boy had been placed in his path. While you travel with the boy, the man in black travels with your soul in his pocket. And the fact that Jake was not slowing him down only opened the way to more sinister possibilities. They passed the symmetrical campfire leavings of the man in black at regular intervals, and it seemed to the gunslinger that these leavings were much fresher now. On the 3rd night, the gunslinger was sure that he could see the distant spark of another campfire somewhere in the first rising swell of the foothills. This did not please him as much as he once might have believed. One of Court's sayings occurred to him, "Where the man who fakes a limp. Near 2 o'clock on the 4th day out from the way station, Jake reeled and almost fell. "Here, sit down," the gunslinger said. "No, I'm okay." "Sit down." The boy sat obediently. The gunslinger squatted close by, so Jake would be in his shadow. "Drink." "I'm not supposed to until—" "Drink." The boy drank 3 swallows. The gunslinger wet the tail of the blanket, which held a good deal less now, and applied the damp fabric to the boy's wrists and forehead, which were fever dry. "From now on, we rest every afternoon at this time. 15 minutes. Do you want to sleep?" "No." The boy looked at him with shame. The gunslinger looked back blandly. In an abstracted way, he withdrew one of the bullets from his belt and began to twirl it how-can between his fingers. The boy watched, fascinated. "That's neat," he said. The gunslinger nodded. "Yeah." He paused. "When I was your age, I lived in a walled city. Did I tell you that?" The boy shook his head sleepily. "Sure. And there was an evil man." "The priest?" "Well, sometimes I wonder about that, tell you true," the gunslinger said. "If they were two, I think now they must have been brothers, maybe even twins. But did I ever see them together? No, I never did. This bad man, this Martin, he was a wizard, like Merlin. Do they ken Merlin, where you come from?" "Merlin and Arthur, and the Knights of the Round Table," Jake said dreamily. The gunslinger felt a nasty jolt go through him. "Yes," he said. "Arthur Eld, you say true. I say thank you. I was very young." But the boy was asleep, sitting up, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Jake." "Yar." The sound of this word from the boy's mouth startled him badly, but the gunslinger wouldn't let his voice show it. "When I snap my fingers, you'll wake up. You'll be rested and fresh. Do you ken it?" "Yes." "Lie over, then." The gunslinger got makings from his poke and rolled a cigarette. There was something missing. He searched for it in his diligent, careful way and located it. The missing thing was his previous maddening sense of hurry, the feeling that he might be left behind at any time, that the trail would die out and he would be left with only a last, fading footprint. All that was gone now, and the gunslinger was slowly becoming sure that the man in black wanted to be caught. Where the man who fakes a limp? What would follow? The question was too vague to catch his interest. Cuthbert would have found interest in it, lively interest, and probably a joke. But Cuthbert was as gone as the horn of Deschain, and the gunslinger could only go forward in the way he knew. He watched the boy as he smoked, and his mind turned back on Cuthbert, who had always laughed. To his death he had gone laughing. And Court, who never laughed, and on Martin, who sometimes smiled, a thin, silent smile that had its own disquieting gleam, like an eye that slips open in the dark and discloses blood. And there had been the falcon, of course. The falcon was named David, after the legend of the boy with the sling. David, he was quite sure, knew nothing but the need for murder, rending, and terror, like the gunslinger himself. David was no dilettante. He played the center of the court, except maybe at the end. The gunslinger's stomach seemed to rise painfully against his heart, but his face didn't change. He watched the smoke of his cigarette rise into the hot desert air and disappear, and his mind went back. 8. The sky was white, perfectly white. The smell of rain, strong in the air, the smell of hedges and growing green was sweet. It was deep spring, what some called new earth. David sat on Cuthbert's arm, a small engine of destruction with bright golden eyes that glared outward at nothing. The rawhide leash, attached to his jesses, was looped carelessly about Bert's arm. Court stood aside from the two boys, a silent figure in patched leather trousers and a green cotton shirt that had been cinched high with his old, wide infantry belt. The green of his shirt merged with the hedges and the rolling turf of the back courts where the ladies had not yet begun to play at points. "Get ready," Roland whispered to Cuthbert. "We're ready," Cuthbert said confidently. "Aren't we, Davy?" They spoke the low speech, the language of both scullions and squires. The day when they would be allowed to use their own tongue in the presence of others was still far. "It's a beautiful day for it. Can you smell the rain? It's—" Court abruptly raised the trap in his hands and let the side fall open. The dove was out and up, trying for the sky in a quick, fluttering blast of its wings. Cuthbert pulled the leash, but he was slow. The hawk was already up, and his takeoff was awkward. The hawk recovered with a brief twitch of its wings. It struck upward, trudging the air, gaining altitude over the dove, moving bullet-swift. Court walked over to where the boys stood, casually, and swung his huge and twisted fist at Cuthbert's ear. The boy fell over without a sound, although his lips writhed back from his gums. A trickle of blood flowed slowly from his ear and onto the rich green grass. "You were slow, maggot," he said. Cuthbert was struggling to his feet. "I cry your pardon, Court. It's just that I—" Court swung again, and Cuthbert fell over again. The blood flowed more swiftly now. "Speak a high speech," he said softly. His voice was flat, with a slight drunken rasp. "Speak your act of contrition in the speech of civilization for which better men than you will ever be have died, maggot." Cuthbert was getting up again. Tears stood brightly in his eyes, but his lips were pressed together in a tight line of hate which did not quiver. "I grieve," Cuthbert said in a voice of breathless control. "I have forgotten the face of my father, whose guns I hope someday to bear." "That's right, brat," Court said. "You'll consider what you did wrong, and sharpen your reflections with hunger. No supper, no breakfast." "Look!" Roland cried. He pointed up. The hawk had climbed above the soaring dove. It glided for a moment, its stubby wings outstretched and without movement on the still white spring air. Then it folded its wings and dropped like a stone. The two bodies came together, and for a moment Roland fancied he could see blood in the air. The hawk gave a brief scream of triumph. The dove fluttered, twisting, to the ground, and Roland ran toward the kill, leaving Court and the chastened Cuthbert behind him. The hawk had landed beside its prey and was complacently tearing into its plump white breast. A few feathers seesawed slowly downward. "David!" the boy yelled, and tossed the hawk a piece of rabbit flesh from his poke. The hawk caught it on the fly, ingested it with an upward shaking of its back and throat, and Roland attempted to releash the bird. The hawk whirled almost absent-mindedly and ripped skin from Roland's arm in a long, dangling gash. Then it went back to its meal. With a grunt, Roland looped the leash again, this time catching David's diving, slashing beak on the leather gauntlet he wore. He gave the hawk another piece of meat, then hooded it. Docilely, David climbed onto his wrist. He stood up proudly, the hawk on his arm. "What's this, can you tell me?" Court asked, pointing to the dripping slash on Roland's forearm. The boy stationed himself to receive the blow, locking his throat against any possible cry, but no blow fell. "He struck me," Roland said. "You pissed him off," Court said. "The hawk does not fear you, boy, and the hawk never will. The hawk is God's gunslinger." Roland merely looked at Court. He was not an imaginative boy, and if Court had intended to imply a moral, it was lost on him. He went so far as to believe that it might have been one of the few foolish statements he had ever heard Court make. Cuthbert came up behind them and stuck his tongue out at Court, safely on his blind side. Roland did not smile, but nodded to him. "Go in now," Court said, taking the hawk. He turned and pointed at Cuthbert. "But remember your reflection, maggot, and your fast tonight and tomorrow morning." "Yes," Cuthbert said, stiltedly formal now. "Thank you for this instructive day." "You learn," Court said, But your tongue has a bad habit of lolling from your stupid mouth when your instructor's back is turned. Mayhap the day will come when it and you will learn their respective places." He struck Cuthbert again, this time solidly between the eyes and hard enough so that Roland heard a dull thud, the sound a mallet makes when a scullion taps a keg of beer. Cuthbert fell backward onto the lawn, his eyes cloudy and dazed at first. Then they cleared, and he stared burningly up at Court, his usual easy grin nowhere to be seen, his hatred unveiled, a pinprick as bright as the dove's blood in the center of each eye. He nodded and parted his lips in a scarifying smile that Roland had never seen. "Then there's hope for you," Court said. "When you think you can, you come for me, maggot." "How did you know?" Cuthbert said between his teeth. Court turned toward Roland so swiftly that Roland almost fell back a step, and then both of them would have been on the grass, decorating the new green with their blood. "I saw it reflected in this maggot's eyes," he said. "Remember it, Cuthbert Allgood. Last lesson for today." Cuthbert nodded again, the same frightening smile on his face. "I grieve," he said. "I have forgotten the face—" "Cut that shit," Court said, losing interest. He turned to Roland. "Go on now, the both of you. If I have to look at your stupid maggot faces any longer, I'll puke my guts and lose a good dinner." "Come on," Roland said. Cuthbert shook his head to clear it and got to his feet. Court was already walking down the hill in his squat, bow-legged stride, looking powerful and somehow prehistoric. The shaved and grizzled spot at the top of his head glimmered. "I'll kill the son of a bitch," Cuthbert said, still smiling. A large goose egg, purple and knotted, was rising mystically on his forehead. "Not you or me," Roland said, suddenly bursting into a grin. "You can have supper in the West Kitchen with me. Cook will give us some." "He'll tell Court." "He's no friend of Court's," Roland said, and then shrugged. "And what if he did?" Cuthbert grinned back. "Sure. Right, I always wanted to know how the world looked when your head was on backwards and upside down." They started back together over the green lawns, casting shadows in the fine, white spring light. 9. The cook in the West Kitchen was named Hax. He stood huge in food-stained whites, a man with a crude oil complexion whose ancestry was a quarter black, a quarter yellow, a quarter from the South Islands, now almost forgotten, the world had moved on, and a quarter gods knew what. He shuffled about 3 high-ceilinged, steamy rooms like a tractor in low gear, wearing huge, caliph-like slippers. He was one of those quite rare adults who communicate with small children fairly well and who love them all impartially, not in a sugary way, but in a business-like fashion that may sometimes entail a hug, in the same way that closing a big business deal may call for a handshake. He even loved the boys who had begun the way of the gun, although they were different from other children, undemonstrative, and always slightly dangerous, not in an adult way, but rather as if they were ordinary children with a slight touch of madness. And Bert was not the first of Court's students whom he had fed on the sly. At this moment he stood in front of his huge, rambling electric stove, one of 6 working appliances left on the whole estate. It was his personal domain, and he stood there watching the 2 boys bolt the gravied meat scraps he had produced. Behind, before, and all around, cook-boys, scullions, and various underlings rushed through the steaming, humid air, rattling pans, stirring stew, slaving over potatoes and vegetables in nether regions. In the dimly lit pantry alcove, a washerwoman with a doughy, miserable face and hair caught up in a rag splashed water around on the floor with a mop. One of the scullery boys rushed up with a man from the guards in tow. "This man, he wants you, Hax." "All right." Hax nodded to the guard, and he nodded back. "You boys," he said, "go over to Maggie. She'll give you some pie, then scat. Don't get me in trouble." Later they would both remember he'd said that. "Don't get me in trouble." They nodded and went over to Maggie, who gave them huge wedges of pie on dinner plates, but gingerly, as if they were wild dogs that might bite her. "Let's eat it understairs," Cuthbert said. "All right." They sat behind a huge, sweating stone colonnade, out of sight of the kitchen, and gobbled their pie with their fingers. It was only moments later that they saw shadows fall on the far curving wall of the wide staircase. Roland grabbed Cuthbert's arm. "Come on," he said. "Someone's coming." Cuthbert looked up, his face surprised and berry-stained. But the shadows stopped, still out of sight. It was Hax and the man from the guards. The boys sat where they were. If they moved now, they might be heard. "The good man," the guard was saying. "Farson?" "In 2 weeks," the guard replied. "Maybe 3. You have to come with us. There's a shipment from the freight depot." A particularly loud crash of pots and pans and a volley of catcalls directed at the hapless potboy who had dropped them blotted out some of the rest. Then the boys heard the guard finish, "Poisoned meat." "Risky. Ask not what the good man can do for you," the guard began. "But what you can do for him," Hax sighed. "Soldier, ask not." "You know what it could mean," the guard said quietly. "Yeah, and I know my responsibilities to him. You don't need to lecture me. I love him just as you do. Would follow him into the sea if he asked, so I would." "All right. The meat will be marked for short-term storage in your coat rooms, but you'll have to be quick. You must understand that." "There are children in Taunton?" the cook asked. It was not really a question. "Children everywhere," the guard said gently. "It's the children we and he care about." Poisoned meat. Such a strange way to care for children. Hax uttered a heavy, whistling sigh. "Will they curdle and hold their bellies and cry for their mammas? I suppose they will." "It'll be like a going to sleep," the guard said, but his voice was too confidently reasonable. "Of course," Hax said, and laughed. "You said it yourself. Soldier, ask not. Do you enjoy seeing children under the rule of a gun when they could be under his hands, ready to start making a new world?" Hax did not reply. "I go on duty in 20 minutes, the guard said, his voice once more calm. "Give me a joint of mutton, and I'll pinch one of your girls and make her giggle. When I leave, my mutton will give no cramps to your belly, Robeson." "Will you—" But the shadows moved away, and the voices were lost. I could have killed them, Roland thought, frozen and fascinated. I could have killed them both with my knife, slit their throats like hogs. He looked at his hands, now stained with gravy and berries, as well as dirt from the day's lessons. "Roland?" He looked at Cuthbert. They looked at each other for a long moment in the fragrant semi-darkness, and a taste of warm despair rose in Roland's throat. What he felt might have been a sort of death, something as brutal and final as the death of the dove in the white sky over the games field. "Hax?" he thought, bewildered. "Hax, who put a poultice on my leg that time? Hax?" And then his mind snapped closed, cutting the subject off. What he saw, even in Cuthbert's humorous, intelligent face, was nothing. Nothing at all. Cuthbert's eyes were flat with Hax's doom. In Cuthbert's eyes it had already happened. He had fed them, and they had gone understairs to eat, and then Hax had brought the guard named Robeson to the wrong corner of the kitchen for their treasonous little tete-a-tete. Ka had worked as Ka sometimes did, as suddenly as a big stone rolling down a hillside. That was all. Cuthbert's eyes were Gunslinger's eyes. 10. Roland's father was only just back from the uplands, and he looked out of place amid the drapes and the chiffon fripperies of the main receiving hall to which the boy had only lately been granted access, as a sign of his apprenticeship. Stephen Deschain was dressed in black jeans and a blue work shirt. His cloak, dusty and streaked, torn to the lining in one place, was slung carelessly over his shoulder with no regard for the way it and he clashed with the elegance of the room. He was desperately thin, and the heavy handlebar moustache below his nose seemed to weight his head as he looked down at his son. The guns crisscrossed over the wings of his hips, hung at the perfect angle for his hands, the worn sandalwood grips looking dull and sleepy in this languid indoor light. "The head cook," his father said softly. "Imagine it. The tracks that were blown upland at the railhead, the dead stock in Hendrickson, and perhaps even imagine. He looked more closely at his son. "It preys on you."
"Like the hawk," Roland said. "It preys on you." He laughed at the startling appropriateness of the image rather than at any lightness in the situation. His father smiled. "Yes," Roland said. "I guess it preys on me."
"Cuthbert was with you," his father said. "He will have told his father by now."
"Yes."
"He fed both of you and court—"
"Yes."
"And Cuthbert, does it prey on him, do you think?"
"I don't know."
Nor did he care. He was not concerned with how his feelings compared with those of others. "It preys on you because you feel you've caused a man's death?" Roland shrugged unwillingly, all at once not content with this probing of his motivations. "Yet you told. Why?" The boy's eyes widened.
"How could I not? Treason was—"
His father waved a hand curtly. "If you did it for something as cheap as a schoolbook idea, you did it unworthily. I would rather see all of Taunton poisoned."
"I didn't." The words jerked out of him violently. "I wanted to kill him, both of them. Liars, black liars, snakes. They—"
"Go ahead."
"They hurt me,"
he finished, defiant.
"They changed something and it hurt. I wanted to kill them for it. I wanted to kill them right there."
His father nodded. "That's crude, Roland, but not unworthy. Not moral either, but it is not your place to be moral. In fact," he peered at his son, "morals may always be beyond you. You are not quick like Cuthbert or Vanne's boy. That's all right, though. It will make you formidable." The boy felt both pleased and troubled by this.
He'll
hang." The boy nodded.
"I want to see it."
The elder Deschain threw his head back and roared laughter. "Not as formidable as I thought, or perhaps just stupid." He closed his mouth abruptly. An arm shot out and grabbed the boy's upper arm painfully. Roland grimaced, but didn't flinch. His father peered at him steadily, and the boy looked back, although it was more difficult than hooding the hawk had been. "All right," he said. "We may," and turned abruptly to go.
"Father?"
"What?"
"Do you know who they were talking about? Do you know who the good man is?"
His father turned back and looked at him speculatively. "Yes, I think I do."
"If you caught him,"
Roland said in his thoughtful, near-plodding way,
"no one else, like Cook, would have to be neck-popped."
His father smiled thinly. "Perhaps not for a while, but in the end, someone always has to have his or her neck popped, as you so quaintly put it. The people demand it. Sooner or later, if there isn't a turncoat, the people make one."
"Yes,"
Roland said, grasping the concept instantly. It was one he never forgot.
"But if you got the good man—"
"No," his father said flatly.
"Why not? Why wouldn't that end it?"
For a moment his father seemed on the verge of saying why, but then shook his head. "We've talked enough for now, I think. Go out from me." He wanted to tell his father not to forget his promise when the time came for Hax to step through the trap, but he was sensitive to his father's moods. He put his fist to his forehead, crossed one foot in front of the other, and bowed. Then he went out, closing the door quickly. He suspected that what his father wanted now was to fuck. He was aware that his mother and father did that, and he was reasonably well informed as to how it was done. But the mental picture that always condensed with the thought made him feel both uneasy and oddly guilty. Some years later, Susan would tell him the story of Oedipus, and he would absorb it in quiet thoughtfulness, thinking of the odd and bloody triangle formed by his father, his mother, and by Martin, known in some quarters as Farson, the good man. Or perhaps it was a quadrangle, if one wished to add himself. 11. Gallows Hill was on the Taunton Road, which was nicely poetic. Cuthbert might have appreciated this, but Roland did not. He did appreciate the splendidly ominous scaffold which climbed into the brilliantly blue sky, an angular silhouette which overhung the coach road. The two boys had been let out of morning exercises. Court had read the notes from their fathers laboriously, lips moving, nodding here and there. When he finished with them, he had carefully put the papers away in his pocket. Even here in Gilead, paper was easily as valuable as gold. When these 2 sheets of it were safe, he'd looked up at the blue-violet dawn sky and nodded again. "Wait here," he said, and went toward the leaning stone hut that served him as living quarters. He came back with a slice of rough, unleavened bread, broke it in 2, and gave half to each. "When it's over, each of you will put this beneath his shoes. Mind you do exactly as I say, or I'll clout you into next week." They had not understood until they arrived, riding double on Cuthbert's gelding. They were the first, fully 2 hours ahead of anyone else, and 4 hours before the hanging. So Gallows Hill stood deserted, except for the rooks and ravens. The birds were everywhere. They roosted noisily on the hard jutting bar that overhung the trap, the armature of death. They sat in a row along the edge of the platform. They jostled for position on the stairs. "They leave the bodies," Cuthbert muttered, "for the birds." "Let's go up," Roland said. Cuthbert looked at him with something like horror. "Up there? Do you think—" Roland cut him off with a gesture of his hands. "We're years early. No one will come." "All right." They walked slowly toward the gibbet, and the birds took wing, cawing and circling like a mob of angry, dispossessed peasants. Their bodies were flat black against the pure dawn light of the in-world sky. For the first time, Roland felt the enormity of his responsibility in the matter. This wood was not noble, not part of the awesome machine of civilization, but merely warped pine from the forest of barony, covered with splattered white bird droppings. It was splashed everywhere, stairs, railing, platform, and it stank. The boy turned to Cuthbert with startled, terrified eyes and saw Cuthbert looking back at him with the same expression. "I can't," Cuthbert whispered. "I can't watch it." Roland shook his head slowly. There was a lesson here, he realized. Not a shining thing, but something that was old and rusty and misshapen. It was why their fathers had let them come. And with his usual stubborn and inarticulate doggedness, Roland laid mental hands on whatever it was. "You can, Bert." "I won't sleep tonight if I do." "Then you won't," Roland said, not seeing what that had to do with it. Cuthbert suddenly seized Roland's hand and looked at him with such mute agony that Roland's own doubt came back, and he wished sickly that they had never gone to the West Kitchen that night. His father had been right. Better not to know. Better every man, woman, and child in Taunton dead and stinking than this. But still, whatever the lesson was, rusty, whatever half-buried thing with sharp edges, he would not let it go or give up his grip on it. "Let's not go up," Cuthbert said. "We've seen everything." And Roland nodded reluctantly, feeling his grip on that thing, whatever it was, weaken. Court, he knew, would have knocked them both sprawling and then forced them up to the platform step by cursing step and sniffing fresh blood back up their noses and down their throats like salty jam as they went. Court would probably have looped new hemp over the yardarm itself and put the noose around each of their necks in turn, would have made them stand on the trap to feel it, and Court would have been ready to strike them again if either wept or lost control of his bladder. And Court, of course, would have been right. For the first time in his life, Roland found himself hating his own childhood. He wished for the long boots of age. He deliberately pried a splinter from the railing and placed it in his breast pocket before turning away. "Why did you do that?" Cuthbert asked. He wished to answer something swaggering. Oh, the luck of the gallows! But he only looked at Cuthbert and shook his head. "Just so I'll have it," he said. "Always have it." They walked away from the gallows, sat down and waited. In an hour or so the first of the townfolk began to gather, mostly families who had come in broken-down wagons and beat-up buckas, carrying their breakfasts with them, hampers of cold pancakes, folded over fillings of wild pokeberry jam. Roland felt his stomach growl hungrily, and wondered again, with despair, where the honor and the nobility was. He had been taught of such things, and was now forced to wonder if they had been lies all along, or only treasures buried deep